Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first time it happened, I told myself it was the house settling. Old bones, old joints. The floorboards in the hallway had always groaned under the weight of years, and our home was no exception. Built in 1947, sold 3 times before we bought it, full of the quiet complaints that come with age. I was 53 years old. I understood the language of decay, but houses don't settle at exactly 3:17 in the morning, not every single night, not with the deliberate, measured rhythm of footsteps. It's been 6 weeks now. I've learned to wake before the sound begins, my body anticipating what my mind refuses to accept. I lie perfectly still in the darkness of our bedroom, the familiar weight of my wife's sleeping form pressed against my back, her breathing slow and undisturbed. The digital clock on my nightstand casts a pale blue glow across the ceiling. 3:15, 3:16, and I wait. My throat tightens. My fingers curl into the sheets. The air itself seems to thicken, pressing down on my chest like something with substance and intention. Then it starts. A creak from the far end of the hallway near the bathroom. Then another, closer. The sound is unmistakable, not the random protest of wood expanding in the cold, but the deliberate compression of weight shifting from one foot to the other. Left, then right, left, then right, moving toward us with the patience of something that knows it has all the time in the world. I count the steps. I always count the steps. 14 from the bathroom to our bedroom door. I've walked that distance 1,000 times, and now I chart its length in the dark like a condemned man measuring the rope. 1, 2, 3. My wife sighs in her sleep, nestles deeper into her pillow. I want to shake her awake, to have her listen, to prove I'm not losing my mind. But I've tried that twice before. Both times she heard nothing. Both times she looked at me with that particular expression. Concern wrapped in exhaustion. Love tinged with something that might have been pity. 4, 5, 6. The footsteps are heavy, unhurried. They carry weight. Real weight. Not the light pad of bare feet, but something denser, something wearing shoes. Dress shoes, perhaps, with hard soles that click against the old oak. My father used to wear shoes like that. He's been in the ground for 11 years. 7, 8. I tell myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. A technique the company therapist taught me when the quarterly report started keeping me up at night. Back then, the worst thing lurking in the dark was the specter of professional failure. How quaint that fear seems now. How innocent. 9, 10. The sound is almost at the door. In a moment, it will stop. It always stops right there, right at the threshold, as if whatever makes the sound understands boundaries it chooses not to cross. Or perhaps it's waiting. Perhaps it's testing. 11, 12, 13. I hold my breath. 14. Silence. The footsteps have stopped exactly where they always stop, on the other side of our bedroom door, less than 8 feet from where I lie. I stare at the strip of darkness beneath the door, searching for a shadow, a shifting of light, some evidence of presence. There's nothing. There's never anything. But I can feel it standing there. I can feel eyes I cannot see pressing through the wood, watching me in the dark. The exhaustion is becoming visible now. My colleague at the office mentioned it yesterday, carefully, diplomatically, the way people dance around uncomfortable observations. He asked if I was sleeping well, if things were all right at home. I told him the truth. I was fine. Everything was fine. The lie slid out of me like something practiced, something I'd been rehearsing for weeks. My wife has noticed too. She hasn't said anything directly, but I catch her watching me over breakfast, her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. When I meet her gaze, she smiles and looks away. We've been married for 26 years. She knows when something is wrong. She knows I'm not telling her what it is. How could I? What would I say? That every night without fail something walks through our hallway and stands outside our door. That I've started staying awake until dawn, afraid to let my guard down. That yesterday, in the hardware store, I found myself pricing deadbolts and security cameras with the frantic energy of a man preparing for siege. She would suggest doctors, specialists. She would speak to me in that careful, gentle voice she used when her mother started forgetting faces near the end. She would love me, and worry for me, and quietly begin to grieve the person she thought I was. So I say nothing. I drink my coffee and I go to work and I count the hours until darkness falls again. Last Tuesday, I did something I'm not proud of. I stayed home from work, told my wife I had a headache, and spent the entire day walking through the house. Room by room, I searched for an explanation. Loose boards that might creak in a pattern, animals in the walls, neighbors with strange schedules. Something, anything, that could make sense of what I've been hearing. The hallway floor is solid. I pressed my weight against every inch of it, listening for the sounds that haunt my nights. The boards are old but firm. They groaned under my feet during the day. Yes, but randomly, without rhythm, the ordinary complaints of aged wood. Nothing like the measured cadence that comes at 3:17. I checked the attic. Empty except for boxes we haven't opened since we moved in. I checked the basement, even though the footsteps clearly come from above, walking toward our bedroom, not below. I stood in the hallway and tried to imagine what could make such a sound without being there. I found nothing, but I noticed something else. Something I had overlooked for years. Perhaps because it had always been there. Perhaps because I hadn't been paying attention. The hallway is 14 steps from the bathroom to our bedroom. I've walked it 1,000 times. But when I counted on Tuesday, really counted, stepping carefully, my heel striking the floor with deliberate precision, I realized something was wrong. The hallway is only 13 steps long. I measured it 4 times. 13 steps, always 13. But the sound I hear every night, the footsteps that approach in the dark, they number 14. Every single time. Where does the extra step come from? I've started sleeping with a flashlight under my pillow. The beam is weak, meant for finding your way to the bathroom, not for confronting intruders. But its weight is reassuring. Something solid in a world that's becoming increasingly uncertain. I've thought about waiting by the door, throwing it open when the footsteps stop, flooding the hallway with light. Forcing myself to see whatever is there, or, perhaps worse, to confirm that nothing is. But my hand always freezes on the sheets. Something in me refuses to move when those sounds begin, some ancient part of my brain that knows better than to draw attention to myself. In those moments, I am not a middle-aged man with a mortgage and a bad back and 2 grown sons at university. I am something older, something prey-shaped, something that understands on a cellular level the importance of staying very, very still. And there's something else. Something I haven't admitted even to myself until now. Sometimes when the footsteps stop and the silence presses down, and I stare at that dark strip beneath the door, I hear breathing, faint, ragged. Not my wife's gentle rhythm and not my own held breath, but something else. Something on the other side of the wood. It sounds like someone who has been walking for a very long time. 3 nights ago, I did something new. After the footsteps stopped and the silence stretched and my nerve endings screamed for release, I spoke. Just one word, barely louder than a whisper. A question I'd been carrying for weeks. Hello? Nothing. The silence continued. My wife slept on, but just as I was about to dismiss the moment as another symptom of my unraveling mind, I heard something. A response. A single word whispered back through the wood, in a voice that sounded exactly like my own. Hello? I didn't sleep that night, or the next. My wife suggested we visit our sons this weekend. She thinks I need a break from work, from routine, from whatever is wearing me down. I agreed immediately. Too quickly, perhaps, because she looked at me strangely afterward. But all I could think was, 800 kilometers away, 2 nights in a hotel, 2 nights without the hallway, without the door, without the footsteps that count one more than they should. We leave tomorrow morning. I've started packing already. Small things, essentials. I'm working from a list because I can't trust my memory anymore. I've been catching myself in small lapses, forgetting where I put my keys, losing track of conversations mid-sentence, staring at familiar objects as if seeing them for the first time. The exhaustion is eating me alive, but there's something else that troubles me. Something I noticed this morning when I was shaving. When I looked at my face in the bathroom mirror and tried to recognize the man staring back. My eyes have changed. They're still brown, still mine. But there's something in them now. Some quality I can't name. Some depth that wasn't there before. When I look at myself, I have the uncomfortable sensation that something is looking back. Not my reflection. Not me. Something behind me. It's 3:15 in the morning. My last night at home before we leave. My wife is asleep beside me. The blue glow of the clock marks the seconds. The house is silent, but the silence feels different tonight. Heavier, expectant. As if something knows I'm leaving and wants to give me a proper farewell. 3:16. I've decided that tonight I will open the door. Tonight, I will see what waits on the other side. This cannot continue. The fear, the doubt, the endless questioning of my own perception. I need to know. Even if knowing destroys me, I need to know. 3:17. The first footstep sounds from the end of the hallway. I throw back the covers. My heart pounds in my ears. 1, 2, 3. The footsteps approach, measured and patient. My hand finds the flashlight. 4, 5, 6. I swing my legs over the side of the bed. 7, 8, 9. I stand. My legs shake but hold. 10, 11, 12. I take a step toward the door. 13. My hand reaches for the handle. 14. Silence. I grip the cold metal. I can hear the breathing now, close and ragged, so close it might be coming from my own throat. My fingers tighten. I twist the handle. I pull the door open and raise the flashlight, flooding the hallway with weak yellow light. Nothing. The hallway is empty. Just darkness and old floorboards and the bathroom door standing ajar at the far end. I sweep the light back and forth, searching every shadow. But there's nothing there. Nothing at all. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My whole body trembles with spent adrenaline. I almost laugh. At myself. At my fear. At the absurdity of a grown man terrorized by the sounds of his own aging house. Then I turn back toward the bedroom. And I see myself. Standing beside the bed. Looking down at my wife. Wearing my face, my body, my clothes from yesterday. Watching her sleep with an expression I don't recognize. Hungry, patient, ancient. My reflection raises its head. Our eyes meet. It smiles. Behind me, the bedroom door swings slowly shut. And from the other side, I hear footsteps beginning to walk away. Story 2. The footage was grainy, the kind of washed-out gray that cheap infrared cameras produce when they're straining against the dark. I found it while scrolling through Tuesday's recordings, searching for evidence of the raccoon that had been knocking over my trash cans. What I found instead was a figure sitting in my living room armchair at 2:17 in the morning. I watched the timestamp tick forward. 2:18, 2:19. The figure didn't move. It sat with its hands folded in its lap, facing the hallway that led to my bedroom, facing the direction where I had been sleeping, alone, as I had slept alone for 3 years since the divorce. The camera's resolution was too poor to make out features, just a shape, a silhouette with the suggestion of shoulders, a head tilted slightly to one side as if listening. I watched for 11 minutes before the figure stood, walked out of frame toward the kitchen, and didn't return. I checked every window, every door. The deadbolt on the front entrance was still engaged from the inside. The chain lock hadn't been disturbed. The sliding glass door to the backyard remained sealed with the wooden dowel I'd placed in the track years ago, back when my ex-wife had worried about break-ins. Back when someone else lived here to worry about such things. That first night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights on, watching the armchair as if expecting it to speak. The cushion showed no indentation. The fabric held no warmth when I pressed my palm against it. Nothing in the room suggested anyone had been there at all, except for 11 minutes of footage on a hard drive that I watched 6 more times before dawn. I installed additional cameras the following weekend. 4 more units, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the hallway, 1 covering the back door, and 1 mounted high in the corner of my bedroom, angled to capture both the door and the window. The clerk at the electronics store asked if I was having trouble with intruders. I told him I was having trouble with something and left it at that. The house felt different after that. I'd lived here long enough to know its rhythms, the way the refrigerator hummed in cycles, the settling sounds the walls made when the temperature dropped at night, the specific creak of the 3rd step on the staircase. But now I found myself cataloging every noise, cross-referencing sounds against footage, trying to catch something in the act of existing. For 5 nights, the recordings showed nothing. Empty rooms, still furniture, the ghostly green glow of appliance lights in the darkness. I began to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, if the figure had been a glitch, a compression artifact, my divorce-addled brain manufacturing phantoms in low-resolution shadow. Then, on the 6th night, I found a glass of water on my nightstand that I didn't remember pouring. It was half empty. The condensation had left a ring on the wood, the kind of ring that forms over hours. I stared at it for a long time, trying to reconstruct my evening. I'd come home from work, heated leftover pasta, watched television without really watching it, gone to bed around 11. I hadn't been to the kitchen after dinner. I was certain of it, almost certain. The bedroom footage showed me sleeping, motionless, for 7 hours. At no point did I get up. At no point did anyone enter the room, but the glass was there, half empty, real. I started keeping a journal, dates, times, observations, anything out of place, anything that felt wrong, anything that made the skin on the back of my neck prickle with the sense of being watched. The list grew faster than I expected. A chair in the kitchen, pulled slightly away from the table. The bathroom mirror, which I always left closed, found open in the morning. A book on my shelf, spine facing inward when I was certain I'd arranged them all the same way. Small things, insignificant things, the kind of things that could be explained by forgetfulness, by the automatic motions of a mind occupied with other concerns. But I wasn't forgetful. That's what my ex-wife used to say during the arguments near the end. That I remembered too much, cataloged too many grievances, held on to details that should have been allowed to fade. She said I lived too much in my head, that I analyzed instead of experienced, that I watched our marriage like it was footage to be reviewed rather than a life to be lived. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's why I noticed when things started to change. 3 weeks after the first sighting, I woke at 2:14 in the morning with the absolute certainty that someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I didn't open my eyes. I lay there in the dark, breathing slowly, listening to the silence that wasn't quite silence. The white noise of an empty house, the distant hum of the highway, the almost imperceptible whir of the camera in the corner recording everything, seeing everything, preserving this moment in grainy infrared permanence. The presence didn't move. Neither did I. We existed in that stillness together for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, maybe seconds. Time stretching and distorting the way it does when fear has hollowed out everything else inside you. I counted my heartbeats. I felt sweat gathering in the hollow of my throat. I waited for something to happen, for the presence to speak or move or touch me, and nothing happened, nothing at all, until I finally opened my eyes and found the room empty. The footage showed me sleeping, just sleeping. No one at the foot of the bed, no one anywhere. But when I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed something on the carpet, a faint impression, barely visible in the morning light. 2 indentations in the pile, roughly the size and shape of bare feet, positioned exactly where I had felt someone standing. I knelt down and touched them. The carpet was cold. I called in sick to work for the first time in 4 years. I spent the day reviewing footage, frame by frame, searching for anything I might have missed. The cameras captured nothing unusual. The cameras captured nothing at all. But the impressions in the carpet were real. I photographed them, I measured them. Size 10 approximately, the same size I wear. That detail bothered me more than it should have. I started sleeping with the lights on. Then I started sleeping in the living room, on the couch, because I couldn't shake the feeling that the bedroom wasn't mine anymore. Something had claimed it. Something that looked like absence, that moved through spaces without disturbing them, that left traces so subtle I couldn't be sure they were traces at all. My neighbor knocked on my door one evening. The older woman from the house next door who'd lived there since before my ex-wife and I moved in. She asked if everything was all right. She said she'd noticed my lights on at odd hours. She said I looked tired. I told her I was fine. She didn't look convinced. She lingered on my porch, her eyes moving past me into the dim interior of the house, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something else, something important. But she just nodded and told me to take care of myself. After she left, I found a fresh glass of water on the kitchen counter, full this time. The faucet was dry. The footage from week 6 showed something that made me sit back from my computer and press my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. It was 3:33 in the morning. The living room camera. I watched myself walk into frame. I was asleep on the couch. I knew I was asleep on the couch because the couch was visible in the corner of the shot, and I could see myself lying there, motionless, beneath the thin blanket I'd been using. But I also watched myself walk into the center of the room and stand there, facing the camera, facing myself, facing the corner where the couch held my sleeping body. The standing figure didn't move. It simply stood there, hands at its sides, head tilted slightly to one side. I watched for 14 minutes. The figure on the couch slept. The figure in the center of the room watched. Then, without any transition I could perceive, the standing figure was gone, and only the sleeping one remained. I reviewed the footage 17 times. I looked for the moment of disappearance, for some sign of movement or transition, for proof that what I was seeing was a glitch, an artifact, anything other than what it appeared to be. The figure was there, and then it wasn't. The timestamps showed no gap. The recording was continuous. I don't remember standing up that night. I don't remember walking into the center of the room, but the footage showed what it showed, and I was no longer certain what that meant about the other recordings, the other nights, the figure in the armchair that I had assumed was an intruder. I stopped checking the footage after that. I disconnected the cameras, one by one, and stored them in the hall closet where I kept things I didn't want to think about. The wedding album, the paperwork from the divorce, a box of photographs that I couldn't bring myself to throw away. The cameras joined them in the dark, their lenses blind, their hard drives full of images I would never review again. For a while, things felt normal. The house settled back into its familiar rhythms. I slept in my bed again, lights off, and woke each morning to find everything exactly as I'd left it. No glasses of water, no displaced chairs, no impressions in the carpet. Whatever had been happening had stopped, or had never been happening at all, or was simply no longer being recorded. I told myself that was enough. I told myself I could live without knowing. Last night I woke at 2:17 in the morning with my hand pressed against the cold glass of the living room window. I was standing at the front of the house, facing the street, wearing the clothes I'd gone to bed in. My feet were bare against the hardwood floor. My breath fogged the glass in slow, rhythmic pulses. I didn't remember getting up. I didn't remember walking through the house. I didn't remember pressing my palm to the window as if trying to reach something or someone on the other side. Outside, the street was empty. The houses of my neighbors were dark. The only illumination came from the streetlight at the corner, casting long shadows across lawns that looked gray in the sodium glow. Everything was still. Everything was quiet. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been standing here alone. I stayed at the window until dawn. I watched the sky lighten through purple and pink and pale morning blue. I watched the shadows retreat. I watched my reflection in the glass grow clearer as the light changed, my face becoming more visible, more solid, more real. Except at one point, just for a moment, just as the sun crested the rooftops to the east, my reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. I'm writing this at the kitchen table now, trying to put into words what I can no longer explain away. The cameras are still in the closet. The footage I saved is still on my computer. The journal I kept is still full of dates and times and observations that add up to nothing or everything, depending on how I look at them, depending on what I'm willing to believe. My neighbor knocked on my door again this morning. She asked if I'd been outside last night. She said she'd seen someone standing at my living room window for hours, just standing there, not moving, watching the street. She said she'd almost called the police, but something about the way the figure stood made her hesitate. Something about the stillness of it, the patience. I told her I didn't remember. She looked at me for a long time, her expression somewhere between concern and something else I couldn't name. Then she reached out and touched my arm, and her hand was cold, so cold, and she told me to take care of myself. Just take care of yourself, she said. We're all watching. I'm not sure anymore who she meant. Story 3. The dog wouldn't stop barking at the basement door. It started 3 weeks ago, always around 2 in the morning. That specific, guttural bark he reserves for genuine threats. Not the excited yapping when the mailman approaches, nor the playful sounds he makes when my wife comes home from her night shifts at the hospital. This was different. Primal. A warning encoded in his DNA from ancestors who understood darkness better than we ever will. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses settle, pipes groan. The furnace clicks and hums with mechanical irregularity. We'd only moved in 4 months prior, purchasing the Victorian fixer-upper for a price that should have raised more questions than it did. The previous owners had left in what the realtor diplomatically called a hurry, abandoning furniture, photographs still hanging crooked on walls, and a basement full of boxes we hadn't bothered to sort through. The estate sale had been handled by a distant nephew who, according to the realtor, had never actually visited the property. I should have asked why. The basement itself was unremarkable. Poured concrete walls, a water heater in one corner, the old coal chute bricked up decades ago, and those abandoned boxes stacked against the far wall like cardboard cairns. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, its pull chain greasy with age. The smell down there was what you'd expect. Damp earth, mildew, the particular mustiness of spaces that rarely see sunlight. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should make a 70-pound German shepherd plant himself at the top of those stairs and refuse to descend, hackles raised, teeth bared at empty air. The first time I investigated, flashlight cutting through the gloom, I found nothing. The second time, nothing. By the 5th midnight expedition, my wife had started sleeping with earplugs, and I had started sleeping with a growing knot of unease lodged somewhere behind my sternum. It was on one of those sleepless nights that I noticed the smell. Subtle at first, so faint I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But as the days passed, it grew more distinct. Not the basement's usual damp decay, but something organic, something alive. A tang of unwashed skin, of breath, of biological presence. I checked for dead animals in the walls, set my phone's flashlight into every crevice I could find. Nothing. The smell would appear without warning, sometimes near the basement door, sometimes drifting from the vents, and then vanish as if it had never existed. I bought a rat trap, a large one, the kind with a spring powerful enough to break small bones. I baited it with sharp cheddar, the good stuff from the farmer's market, and placed it in the far corner of the basement, behind the stack of boxes, where the shadows seemed thickest. If something was living down there, I would catch it. I would have proof that the sounds, the smell, the dog's relentless anxiety all had a rational explanation. 3 days passed. The trap remained untouched. On the 4th morning, I found it sprung. The cheese was gone, and the metal bar had snapped down on nothing but air. I examined the mechanism, wondering if it had simply misfired. These things happened. Humidity could affect the sensitivity, temperature fluctuations. A dozen mundane explanations presented themselves, and I accepted each one gratefully. Then I saw the wall. The concrete beside the boxes bore 4 parallel scratches, each perhaps 3 inches long, gouged into the gray surface with enough force to leave pale grooves in the stone. I crouched down, my knees protesting against the cold floor, and traced one of the marks with my fingertip. The edges were ragged, uneven, not tool marks, too organic for that, and spaced exactly as wide as a human hand. I spent a long time staring at those scratches, long enough for the basement's chill to seep through my clothes and settle into my bones. When I finally climbed back upstairs, the dog was waiting at the door, watching me with an expression I can only describe as knowing. He sniffed my hands, my clothes, then retreated to his bed in the corner of the living room and didn't move for the rest of the day. I didn't tell my wife about the scratches. How could I? She already thought I was becoming obsessed, spending too many nights investigating imaginary sounds while she worked doubles at the hospital. The dark circles under my eyes had become a permanent feature. I'd lost 8 pounds without trying. When she looked at me now, I saw something troubling in her gaze. Not concern exactly, but the beginning of distance. The way you might look at someone you're not sure you can trust anymore. Maybe she was right. Maybe the stress of the move, the new mortgage, the pressure at work. Maybe it was all manifesting as this fixation on the basement. The human mind is remarkably good at constructing narratives where none exist. I'd read about pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli. Perhaps those scratches were old. Perhaps they'd always been there, and I'd simply never noticed until I started looking. But the boxes had moved. I was certain of it. The stack against the far wall had been arranged with the largest containers at the bottom, medium in the middle, smallest on top. Basic physics, basic organization. Now the configuration was different, subtly, almost imperceptibly different. A large box sat atop 2 smaller ones. One container had been rotated, its label facing the wall instead of outward. And in the gap where the stack met the corner, in that triangle of shadow that the basement's single bulb couldn't quite reach, there was a space, a hollow, large enough for a person to curl inside if they pressed themselves small enough. I didn't check the hollow. I couldn't bring myself to approach it. That night the sounds changed. Not just the scratching anymore. Now there was breathing. Slow, rhythmic exhalations that seemed to come from directly beneath the floor of my bedroom. I lay rigid under the covers, staring at the ceiling, feeling my wife's warmth beside me and finding no comfort in it. The dog had stopped barking entirely. He now spent his nights in the kitchen, as far from the basement door as the house's layout would allow, and whimpered softly in his sleep. I began leaving the basement light on. I told myself it was to discourage rats, but the truth sat like a stone in my stomach. I was afraid of what might move through that darkness when I couldn't see it. Each morning, I would check the bulb, expecting to find it burned out, tampered with. Each morning, it glowed steadily, illuminating nothing but concrete and dust and those damned boxes. The footsteps started on a Tuesday, soft, shuffling sounds that traveled from one end of the basement to the other, always between 3 and 4 in the morning. I timed them, lying awake with my phone's clock burning in my vision. The pattern never varied. Movement beginning at the base of the stairs, crossing to the far wall, pausing in that shadowed corner, then returning. Sometimes the shuffling would stop directly beneath where I lay, and I would hold my breath, convinced that something below was holding its breath too. Both of us waiting, listening, aware of each other in a way that transcended the floor between us. I started checking the basement each dawn. The boxes had been opened. The contents, old clothes, moth-eaten books, yellowed newspapers from the 1970s, had been disturbed, arranged in ways that suggested examination. A dress had been unfolded and laid across the concrete. A book lay open to a page showing a family portrait, 4 faces smiling from the sepia paper, none of whom I recognized. I found a blanket, one that had definitely been inside a box labeled linens, now wadded in that corner hollow, stained with something I refused to examine closely. The smell was stronger now, inescapable. I researched the house's history. Public records showed nothing remarkable, a series of owners stretching back to the 1920s, the most recent being an elderly woman who had lived alone for 37 years before her death. Natural causes, the obituary stated. No family present, No funeral service. Her nephew, the one who'd handled the estate, lived 3 states away and had apparently shown no interest in the property beyond converting it to cash as quickly as possible. I found a photograph of her buried in one of the boxes, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, standing in front of what was clearly this house, the porch railing visible behind her. She wasn't smiling, but there was something in her eyes, a wariness maybe, a watchfulness. Behind her, barely visible in the photograph's faded background, a basement window showed only darkness. The coal chute. I hadn't thought about it since we'd moved in. Just another feature of an old house, bricked up and forgotten. But that night, standing in the basement with every light burning, I examined the brickwork more closely. The mortar was old, yes, crumbling at the edges, but in one section near the floor, the gaps between bricks were too uniform, too deliberate, as if they'd been removed and replaced carefully by someone who wanted to maintain the appearance of permanence while preserving the option of access. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't call the police. What would I say? Someone might be living in my basement, but I have no proof. Just scratches and sounds and a feeling that I'm being watched every moment I spend in this house. They would smile. They would nod. They would make notes in files that would follow me for years. Instead, I bought a camera. A small, motion-activated device that I hid among the boxes, its lens trained on that shadowed corner. If something was down there, I would finally have evidence. I would finally know. The first night, the camera recorded 8 hours of nothing. Static images, empty basement, the steady glow of the overhead bulb. The second night, the camera was gone. I searched everywhere, behind boxes, under the water heater, in corners I hadn't explored since we'd moved in. Nothing. The device had simply vanished, taking with it whatever it might have captured. And in the corner where I'd placed it, scratched into the concrete with those same ragged marks, I found something new. Numbers. A date, maybe, though I couldn't be certain. And below them, 2 words that I stared at for so long, my vision began to blur. 2 words that made no sense, and yet made terrible, perfect sense. Still here, I haven't slept in 4 days. My wife is talking about visiting her mother, maybe staying a few weeks. She says I need rest, need perspective, need to step away from whatever is consuming me. She doesn't say it, but I can see the thought forming behind her concerned expression. The thought that perhaps I'm not well, that perhaps the man she married is becoming someone else, someone she doesn't recognize, someone who spends his nights listening to sounds that don't exist, and his days searching for proof of an impossible presence. Maybe she's right. The boxes are rearranged again this morning. The blanket in the corner has a depression in its center, roughly body-sized. The smell is so strong now that it clings to my clothes, my hair, my skin. And last night I'm almost certain I heard humming. A tune I didn't recognize, drifting up through the floorboards in a voice that was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, but somehow both and neither. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The dog is gone. He slipped out when my wife left for work and hasn't returned. I've walked the neighborhood, called his name until my throat ached, checked the shelters. Nothing. But this morning, examining the basement door for the 100th time, I noticed something I'd missed before. Scratch marks on the inside of the frame. Fresh ones. The wood still pale and splintered. Not trying to get out. Trying to get in. I'm writing this at the kitchen table. The basement door in my peripheral vision. The house silent around me. It's 2 a.m, the time when the sounds usually start. But tonight, there's nothing. No shuffling. No breathing. No scratches against concrete. Just silence. Thick and expectant. The kind of silence that feels like held breath. I keep thinking about that hollow behind the boxes. About the camera that disappeared. About the words scratched into the wall. Words that imply not an intruder but a resident. Someone. Something. That considers this place home. That has considered it home for longer than I've been alive. The basement light just flickered. I'm going to go down there. One more time. I need to see, need to know, need to understand what has been sharing this house with me all along. My flashlight is charged, my phone is in my pocket, and somewhere in this house, in the walls, or the floors, or the spaces between spaces, something is waiting, has been waiting. The light is steady again now, but the smell is stronger than ever. And I realize, sitting here with my hand on the basement door's cold knob, that it's not coming from below anymore. It's coming from behind me. Story 4. The bathroom light clicked on at 3:17 a.m. again. I lay still beneath the sheets, my eyes fixed on the thin strip of yellow bleeding under the bedroom door. The hum of the fluorescent tube buzzed through the silent apartment like a wasp trapped in a jar, and I waited, counting the seconds, listening for footsteps that never came, until it flickered off exactly 4 minutes later. This had been happening for 11 nights. My wife slept beside me, undisturbed, her breathing slow and rhythmic. She never woke. Not once. I had tried to shake her awake the third night it happened, desperate for a witness, but she had only murmured something incoherent and turned away. In the morning, she remembered nothing. She looked at me with that expression I had been seeing more frequently, a mixture of concern and something else, something that felt dangerously close to doubt. The electrician came on day 5, a stocky man with calloused hands and a tool belt that jingled as he moved. He spent 2 hours testing the wiring, the switches, the fixtures. Everything was normal, no shorts, no faulty connections, no timers. He scratched his head, shrugged, and told me it was probably just the building's old electrical system acting up. These things happened in apartments built in the 70s, he said. Nothing to worry about. But I saw his eyes flick toward me as he left, just for a moment. And in that glance, I recognized a familiar wariness. The same look my wife had been giving me. The same look my colleague at work gave me when I arrived exhausted for the 3rd consecutive week. Dark circles carved beneath my eyes like bruises. I had stopped sleeping properly. How could I? Every night I waited for that click, that hum, that thin bar of light sliding under the door like a pale, accusing finger. Last night changed everything. I had made a decision. I would not simply lie there anymore, paralyzed by some irrational fear of my own bathroom. I was a rational man. An accountant, for God's sake. I dealt in numbers, in logic, in patterns that made sense. There had to be an explanation. When the light clicked on, 3:17, always 3:17, I threw off the covers and crossed the bedroom in 3 quick strides. The floorboards groaned beneath my bare feet, cold and slightly damp with that particular chill old buildings hold in their bones. I gripped the brass handle of the bathroom door. It was cold, too, colder than it should have been, and for a moment I hesitated. The hum seemed louder from this close, deeper, almost like breathing. I pushed the door open. The bathroom light blazed overhead, stark and white, casting everything in harsh, clinical clarity. The tiles gleamed. The faucet dripped, one slow, fat drop that echoed against the porcelain sink like a heartbeat. And the mirror. The mirror was fogged. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. There was no steam. The shower hadn't been used for hours. The window was sealed shut, painted over years ago by some previous tenant who had never bothered to scrape it open. There was no reason, no logical, rational reason, for that mirror to be covered in condensation. And yet it was, thick and milky, obscuring my reflection completely, except for the words. Someone, something, had traced letters into the fog, clear, deliberate strokes that glistened wetly under the fluorescent glare. I see you sleep. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes, perhaps, maybe longer. At some point, my hand reached out, trembling though I didn't want to admit it, and touched the glass. It was ice cold, so cold it burned. And as my fingers made contact, the fog began to dissipate, evaporating as if it had never existed, leaving only the clean, clear surface of the mirror and my reflection, staring back at me. Except, and this is the part I have not told anyone, not my wife, not anyone, except my reflection's eyes weren't quite right. They seemed to move a fraction of a second, After. I moved. To blink a moment. Too late. I backed out of the bathroom. I did not run. I walked, carefully, deliberately, keeping my breathing steady, and I closed the door behind me. I did not look at the mirror again. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, things have escalated. It started small. Objects moved from where I had left them. My coffee cup, which I always placed on the right side of my desk, would be on the left. My shoes, lined up neatly by the door each night, would be turned to face the wall each morning. My wife denied touching them. She was telling the truth. I could see it in her bewildered expression, but that only made it worse. Then the sounds began. Footsteps in the hallway at night. Soft, deliberate, measured, always stopping just outside the bedroom door. I would hold my breath, straining to hear, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. A thick, heavy silence, a waiting silence, and the feeling, God, the feeling. I am being watched, constantly. Even now, as I write this, sitting at the small desk in our cramped living room with the afternoon sun streaming through the curtains, I can feel it. A presence, just at the edge of my peripheral vision. A weight in the air, like the pressure before a storm. When I turn to look, there's nothing there. Of course there's nothing there. But the feeling remains. A cold patch that follows me from room to room, a sense of attention, focused and unblinking. My wife has suggested I see someone, a doctor, a therapist. She said it gently, holding my hands in hers, her voice soft and careful like she was talking to someone fragile, someone broken. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. I'm not sure I believe myself. 3 days ago, I set up my phone to record the bathroom overnight. Motion activated. If something was happening, if something was there, I would have proof. Evidence. Something tangible to show her, to show everyone that I wasn't losing my mind. The next morning, I checked the footage with trembling fingers. The recording showed the bathroom light clicking on at 3:17. The camera had captured it perfectly. The sudden blaze of fluorescence, the empty tiles, the mirror. For 4 minutes, nothing happened. The bathroom sat there, silent and still, bathed in that harsh white glow. And then the light clicked off. But in the final frame, the very last second before the recording ended, I saw something. A shape, barely visible, standing in the corner of the bathroom just outside the main pool of light. A silhouette, dark and indistinct, roughly human in form, but wrong somehow. The proportions didn't match. The limbs were too long. The head was tilted at an angle that no neck should allow, and it was looking at the camera. I watched that frame over and over, zoomed in, enhanced. Tried to convince myself it was a shadow, a trick of the light. Pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see patterns and faces where none exist. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. Whatever it was, it knew I was recording. Whatever it was, it wanted me to see. My wife left yesterday morning. Not permanently, she assured me. Just for a few days. She was going to stay with her sister in the city. She needed space, she said. Time to think. She was worried about me, she said. The look in her eyes told a different story. She was afraid. Not for me, but of me. I didn't blame her. I barely recognized the man in the mirror anymore. And that was the other thing. The reflection. It had gotten worse. Every time I passed a reflective surface, the bathroom mirror, the darkened window at night, even the black screen of my phone, I caught something off. A delay in movement. A flicker of expression that didn't match my own. Once, I could have sworn I saw my reflection smile when I wasn't smiling at all. A thin, tight smile that didn't reach the eyes. I covered the bathroom mirror with a towel. Then I covered the bedroom mirror. Then the hallway mirror. But windows still exist. Spoons still gleam. Water still holds a faint, rippling image of my face. I can't escape my own reflection. And I can't shake the growing suspicion that my reflection is not mine at all. Tonight, I made a terrible mistake. The bathroom light clicked on at 3:17, as it always does. But this time, I didn't go to the door. This time, I lay perfectly still, breathing shallow, pretending to sleep. I don't know why I thought it would work. I don't know what I was hoping to accomplish. But some primal instinct told me to be quiet, to be invisible, to let whatever was happening happen without interference. The light stayed on for longer this time. 6 minutes. 7. I counted each second in my head, feeling the sweat gather at the base of my spine, listening to the hum that seemed to grow louder, more insistent, almost like words just below the threshold of hearing. And then I heard it. The bathroom door opened. Not quickly. Slowly. A long, drawn-out creak that scraped against my nerves like a blade. I squeezed my eyes shut so tight I saw bursts of color behind my lids. My heart slammed against my ribs. Every muscle in my body locked rigid. Footsteps. Soft. Deliberate. Moving across the bedroom floor. Closer. Closer. They stopped at the foot of my bed. I could feel it. The presence. The attention. That terrible, focused awareness pressing down on me like a physical weight. My lungs burned for air, but I didn't dare breathe. Didn't dare move. Didn't dare open my eyes. Something leaned close. I could feel the cold radiating off it. A deep, bone-chilling cold that seeped through the blankets and into my skin. And then, so close to my ear that I could feel the words rather than hear them, it whispered, "Open your eyes." I didn't. I don't know how long I lay there, minutes, hours, an eternity compressed into a single endless moment. But eventually, the cold receded. The footsteps retreated. The bathroom door creaked shut. The light clicked off. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was empty. The apartment was silent. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the mirror. I had covered the bedroom mirror before going to sleep. I was certain of it, but the towel now lay crumpled on the floor, and written in the dust on the glass, dust I hadn't noticed accumulating, dust that shouldn't have been there, were 4 words. You should have looked. It's morning now. The sun is rising, pale and weak, filtering through the curtains. I haven't slept. I don't know if I'll ever sleep again. I've been thinking about the recording, the shape in the corner, the reflection that moves a second too late, the words in the fog, the whisper in the dark, and I've been thinking about something my wife said before she left. She said I had changed, that I didn't seem like myself anymore, that she looked into my eyes and saw someone else staring back. I laughed when she said it. But now, sitting here in the gray morning light, I'm not laughing, because I've started to wonder if something has been watching me sleep every night, entering my bathroom, standing at the foot of my bed, whispering in my ear. Then when, exactly, did it start? Was it 11 nights ago when I first noticed the light? Or has it been here longer? Months? Years? My entire life? And the thought that truly terrifies me, the thought I can't escape no matter how hard I try, is this. If it has been watching me this whole time, if it has been here all along, then how do I know I'm still the one in control? How do I know that the man sitting here writing these words is still me? I just caught my reflection in the window. It smiled. I didn't. Story 5. The first scratch appeared 3 weeks ago. I discovered it in the shower, a thin line of fire running diagonally across my left shoulder blade when the hot water hit it. I twisted in front of the bathroom mirror, craning my neck until my muscles ached, trying to see what had caused that sudden sting. There it was. A single red welt, thin as a paper cut but deeper, the skin around it raised and angry. I must have scraped myself against something in my sleep, I thought. The headboard, perhaps. The rough edge of the nightstand. But the headboard is padded, and my nightstand has no rough edges. I live alone in a small apartment on the 4th floor of a building that smells perpetually of old carpet and someone else's cooking. I have lived here for 2 years. I know every crack in the ceiling, every groan of the pipes, every shadow that the streetlight casts through the blinds at night. I know how the floorboards creak near the kitchen, how the refrigerator hums in a rhythm that has become as familiar as my own heartbeat. This place is mine. There is no one else here. And yet, the scratches kept coming. One became 2, then 4. They appeared overnight, always on my back, always in places I couldn't reach. I examined my sheets for something sharp, a loose spring, a piece of metal, anything that might explain the marks. I found nothing. I checked my fingernails, already bitten down to the quick from a nervous habit I've never been able to break. They were too short to scratch skin, let alone break it. I pressed them experimentally against my forearm, and they barely left a mark. I started sleeping on my stomach. The scratches still came, now on my shoulders, my lower back, parallel lines like something had dragged itself across my skin while I slept. 2 nights ago, I stopped sleeping at all. Yesterday morning, exhausted and jittery from too much coffee, I bought a small camera from the electronics store down the street, the kind people use to watch their pets while they're at work, or to keep an eye on packages left at their doors. It connected to an app on my phone, recording continuously through the night. I positioned it on my bookshelf, angled toward my bed, the tiny red light blinking steadily in the darkness like a single watchful eye. I told myself I was being rational. This was the logical thing to do. Whatever was happening, the camera would reveal it. Perhaps I was sleepwalking. Perhaps I was doing this to myself in some fugue state I couldn't remember. The mind does strange things under stress, and I had been under a lot of stress lately. Trouble at work, a persistent cough I couldn't shake, the kind of bone-deep loneliness that comes from spending too many nights in the company of no one but yourself. The brain, I reasoned, might manifest that tension in unexpected ways. I took a sleeping pill that night. Just one. I needed rest badly, and I needed to stay asleep long enough for the camera to capture whatever was happening. The pill pulled me under quickly, a thick, dreamless descent into nothing. I woke at 4:17 a.m., not gradually, the way one usually surfaces from sleep, but all at once, completely, as if someone had spoken my name directly into my ear. My heart was pounding. My back was on fire. I didn't need to look to know there would be new marks. I could feel them. 3 distinct lines running from my right shoulder blade down toward my spine, hot and throbbing like fresh burns. But it wasn't just the pain that had woken me. It was the cold. The room was frigid, my breath misting in the air, though I could hear the radiator clicking and groaning as it always did. And there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, something organic and wrong, like soil after rain mixed with something sweeter, almost floral. Rotting flowers left too long in stagnant water. I lay very still. The apartment was silent in a way that felt intentional, the kind of silence that comes when something is listening. I strained to hear anything. Footsteps, breathing, the rustle of fabric. But there was nothing, just the absence of sound pressing against my ears like cotton. Eventually, I reached for my phone. The app showed 9 hours of footage. I scrubbed through it with trembling fingers, watching myself lie motionless in the grainy night vision green. Hours passed in seconds. I saw myself turn once, twice, my sleeping body restless in the chemical grip of the pill. Nothing unusual. Then 3 a.m. The timestamp clicked over to 3 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, and the footage dissolved into static. Not gradual static. Not the kind of degradation you might expect from a cheap camera or a weak Wi-Fi signal. This was sudden and total, a wall of gray and white noise that filled the screen completely. I could hear it too, through my phone's tiny speaker, a hissing, crackling sound that seemed too loud, too present, as if it were coming from inside the room rather than from a recording. For 1 hour exactly, from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., the camera recorded nothing but static. At 4000, the image snapped back to clarity. There I was again, lying in bed, unchanged. Except I wasn't unchanged. In the footage, I was in a different position than I had been at 3 o'clock, my body now turned on my side, the blankets pushed down around my waist, and even in the low resolution of the night vision, I could see them. 3 dark lines across my back where there had been none before. I played the static section again, and again. I turned the volume up, searching for any sound beneath the white noise, any hint of what had happened during that lost hour. There was something there, I realized after the 5th or 6th replay, buried under the hiss, almost imperceptible. A rhythm. Not mechanical, not electrical. Something that rose and fell with an organic cadence. Breathing. I told myself it was pareidolia, the human brain finding patterns in chaos, meaning in meaninglessness. We see faces in clouds and hear voices in wind. It's a survival mechanism, nothing more. I was tired. I was scared. And I was projecting my fear onto random noise. But I couldn't unhear it. I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick, my voice thin and unconvincing even to myself, and spent the morning researching. I told myself I was looking for rational explanations, camera malfunctions, electromagnetic interference, sleepwalking disorders. But the searches I actually ran told a different story. I found myself reading about parasomnia and fugue states. Yes, but also about sleep paralysis entities and night visitations. About things that stand in the corners of bedrooms and wait for the small hours when the membrane between waking and sleeping grows thin. I found forums where people shared their own stories, scratches they couldn't explain, bruises that appeared overnight, photographs with shadows that didn't belong to anyone in the room, videos where the static came and went with no clear cause. Most of the stories sounded ridiculous in the light of day, the ravings of lonely, frightened people searching for meaning in coincidence, but some of them sounded like mine. In the afternoon, I walked through my apartment and checked every window, every door, all locked. I examined the walls for hidden passages, feeling foolish even as I pressed my hands against the drywall and knocked, listening for hollow spaces. I searched the closets, looked under the bed, opened every cabinet and drawer. I was alone. I had always been alone. The smell came back as the sun began to set. That same organic wrongness, wet earth and dying flowers. It was strongest near my bed, near the bookshelf where the camera sat still blinking its red eye. I stood in the center of the room, breathing it in, and felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. The certainty that I was being watched. I don't mean the vague unease of thinking someone might be looking at you. I mean the primal physical knowledge of another presence, so strong that my skin prickled and my stomach dropped. There was something in the room with me. I couldn't see it. I couldn't hear it. But I knew in my bones, in the animal part of my brain that predates language, that I was not alone. I spun around. Nothing. Shadows in the corners. Yes, but only the shadows that belonged there. The last of the daylight slanting through the blinds. The familiar geography of my small, ordinary life. But the smell remained. That night, I set up a second camera, then a third. I positioned them at different angles, different heights, powered by different outlets. If it was an electrical issue, if it was interference from the building's old wiring, I would catch it. I would see a pattern. I would understand. I didn't take a sleeping pill this time. I lay in bed with my eyes open, watching the red lights blink, listening to my own heartbeat, trying to stay awake. The hours stretched, my eyes burned. The radiator clicked and groaned. Somewhere in the building a door slammed, and I flinched so hard my neck hurt. I must have fallen asleep eventually. I don't remember it happening. One moment I was staring at the ceiling, and the next I was opening my eyes to gray morning light and the familiar fire across my back. New scratches. 4 of them this time, longer than before, curving around my side toward my ribs. I checked the cameras. Static. All 3 of them. From 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. exactly. But there was something else this time. In the seconds just before the static began, in the frames between 2:59:58 and 3:0:00, there was a flicker. I had to slow the playback down, advancing frame by frame to see it. A single frame, lasting perhaps 1/10 of a second. A shape. It was in the corner of the room, near the door. Dark, indistinct, too blurred to make out any details. It could have been a glitch, a compression artifact, a trick of the cheap camera's lens. It could have been my coat hanging on the back of the door, caught in a moment of visual noise. But I don't hang my coat on the back of the door. I stared at that single frame until my eyes watered. I zoomed in, enhanced it with software I downloaded from the internet, adjusted the contrast and brightness until the pixels dissolved into meaningless squares of gray and black. The shape remained, tall, narrow, somehow wrong in its proportions. Limbs too long, I told myself, like something had been stretched, or like something I couldn't quite perceive correctly, like looking at an object from a dimension my eyes weren't built to process. I called in sick again today. I haven't eaten. The smell is constant now, thick and sweet and everywhere. I've opened all the windows, but it doesn't help. The cold from outside just carries the scent deeper into the apartment, into my clothes, my hair, my skin. The sun is setting again. I can see it through the blinds, that last orange glow that makes everything look temporary. In an hour, maybe two, it will be dark, and then I will have to decide, do I stay awake and face what might be coming, or do I sleep and surrender to the static hours? Here is what I know. Something is happening to me. Something I cannot see, cannot hear, cannot explain. Every night between 3 and 4, the world goes blank, and I wake up marked. Every night the presence in my room grows stronger, more certain. Every night the shape in the corner becomes a little clearer. Here is what I don't know, whether any of this is real. I've been under stress, I've been alone too long, I've been sleeping badly, eating worse, spending my days in the blue glow of screens, and my nights in the red glow of cameras. The mind can fracture under pressure. It can invent terrors to explain its own deterioration. The scratches could be self-inflicted in ways too subtle for me to detect. The static could be coincidence. The shape could be pareidolia, my frightened brain assembling meaning from noise. I could be losing my mind. It would explain everything. It would be the simplest answer, the one that requires no suspension of disbelief, no violation of the physical laws I've always trusted to keep the world ordered and safe. But there's something wrong with that explanation too. If I'm imagining this, if my brain is manufacturing evidence of a threat that doesn't exist, then why? What evolutionary purpose does it serve to terrorize yourself? And if the static is a product of my deteriorating perception, if the scratches are something I'm doing to myself in my sleep, then what does it mean that the marks are getting deeper? What does it mean that last night, for the first time, they drew blood? Tonight I'll set up the cameras again. Tonight I'll try to stay awake. Tonight I'll sit in the dark with my back against the wall and my eyes on the door, and I'll wait for 3 a.m. to arrive. I don't know what I expect to see. I don't know what I want to see. Maybe the static will come for me too. Maybe the world will dissolve into gray noise, and I'll finally understand what happens in that lost hour, what visits me while the cameras go blind. Or maybe nothing will happen. Maybe I'll sit here in the dark, alone as I've always been, watching the minutes tick toward morning. Maybe the scratches will appear anyway, even with my eyes open, even with my mind alert. Maybe I'll watch my own skin split open with no explanation, no cause. Nothing but the slow realization that some things cannot be recorded, cannot be proven, cannot be understood. The red lights are blinking, the sun is almost gone, and somewhere in the walls, or in the corners, or in the spaces between 1 second and the next, something is waiting for the hour when the world goes dark and the watching machines fall silent. I can smell it. I can feel it. And for the first time, I think I can almost hear it too. Buried beneath the hiss of empty rooms and quiet nights. A rhythm, a breath, a voice that knows my name, waiting. Story 6. The house settled around me like a second skin, creaking in places I hadn't expected, breathing in rhythms I couldn't predict. My wife had fallen asleep hours ago, exhausted from unpacking boxes that seemed to multiply in the dim light of our new living room. I sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a glass of water that had grown warm in my hands, listening to sounds that didn't belong to any house I'd ever known. We had moved in 3 days prior, The realtor, a woman with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, had called it a character home, a phrase I now understood meant something different than I'd assumed. Character in this case meant floorboards that groaned under invisible weight at 2 in the morning. It meant cold spots that appeared without explanation in the hallway, dissipating the moment I acknowledged them. It meant the persistent feeling that the walls themselves were paying attention. That first week, I attributed everything to the natural anxiety of relocation. New sounds, new shadows. The brain struggling to map an unfamiliar space onto its internal architecture. I was a rational man. I had always been a rational man. But rationality began to fray at the edges the night I first heard the whispering. It came from the guest bedroom on the second floor, a room we hadn't touched yet, still filled with the previous owner's abandoned furniture. A low, continuous murmur, like someone reading aloud from a great distance. I stood outside the door for what felt like hours, my hand hovering over the doorknob, my breath shallow and quick. When I finally pushed the door open, the sound stopped. The room was empty except for a dusty armchair facing the window and a small desk pushed against the far wall. The air smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, though neither my wife nor I smoked. I mentioned none of this to her. I told myself I was being considerate, sparing her unnecessary worry. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I wasn't sure I could describe what I was experiencing without sounding unhinged. How do you explain to someone that a house feels wrong? That certain corners seem deeper than they should be? That you've started avoiding mirrors after dark because the reflections take a fraction of a second too long to move? The whispering returned the following night, and the night after that. Always from the same room. Always that same indistinct murmur, too low to make out individual words, but too purposeful to be random noise. I began leaving the hallway light on, as if illumination could serve as some kind of ward. It didn't help. The light only seemed to make the shadows in my peripheral vision more defined, more deliberate in their movements. On the 7th day, I found the photograph. I'd been cleaning out the basement, a task I'd been avoiding since we arrived. The previous owners had left behind boxes of old newspapers, broken furniture, and the accumulated detritus of what appeared to be decades of neglect. Among the debris, wedged between 2 moldy cardboard boxes, I discovered a leather-bound photo album. Its pages were warped with moisture damage. The photographs inside faded to sepia tones that made everyone look like ghosts even before I understood what I was looking at. Most of the images were unremarkable. Birthday parties, holiday gatherings, the mundane documentation of a life I had no connection to. But near the back of the album, I found a portrait that made me stop breathing. A man sat in the armchair from the guest bedroom. The same armchair, I was certain, though the upholstery had been a different color then. He was middle-aged, with deep-set eyes and a thin mouth that seemed to be fighting against a smile. In his hand, he held a pipe. The photograph had been taken in what appeared to be our guest bedroom, and through the window behind him, I could see the same oak tree that still stood in our backyard, though it was smaller then, younger. On the back of the photograph, in faded blue ink, someone had written a name and a date. The name meant nothing to me. The date was 1986. I should have stopped there. A rational man would have put the album back, climbed the basement stairs, and never thought about it again. But something had begun to take root in my mind. A suspicion, an itch I couldn't ignore. I found myself at the local library the next morning, poring over microfilm archives of the town newspaper, searching for any mention of the name I'd found. The obituary was brief, almost perfunctory. The man had died in 1987, in his home, my home, after what the newspaper delicately referred to as a prolonged illness. He had lived alone. He had no surviving relatives. The house had sat empty for nearly 2 years before being sold, and had changed hands several times since. The realtor, I now recalled, had been reluctant to discuss the property's history. I had assumed she was simply eager to close the deal. That night, the whispering grew louder. I lay in bed beside my sleeping wife, staring at the ceiling, listening to the murmur from down the hall. It was clearer now, almost on the verge of intelligibility. I could make out rhythms, cadences, something that might have been sentences if I could just concentrate hard enough. My wife stirred beside me, and I held my breath, terrified that she might wake and hear it too, or worse, that she might wake and hear nothing at all. I began to lose track of time. The days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and mounting dread. I stopped sleeping, or slept only in brief, fitful intervals filled with dreams I couldn't remember but woke from sweating and disoriented. My wife noticed the change. How could she not? But I deflected her concerns with excuses about work stress, about adjusting to the new environment. She accepted my explanations, or pretended to. I could see the worry in her eyes, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The cold spots spread. They were no longer confined to the hallway. I found them in the kitchen, in the bathroom, in the corner of our bedroom where I'd placed my reading chair. The temperature would drop without warning, 15 or 20 degrees in an instant, and I would feel that familiar sensation of being observed, of something just beyond the edge of my vision waiting for me to acknowledge its presence. I started seeing him in mirrors. Not clearly, never clearly. Just a shape in my peripheral vision, a smudge of darkness that might have been a figure standing behind me. Every time I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. Every time I looked back at the mirror, the shape had moved, or vanished, or settled into a new position slightly closer than before. My wife asked me one evening why I had covered all the mirrors in the house with sheets. I had no memory of doing this. I stood in the hallway, staring at the white fabric draped over the antique mirror we'd brought from our previous apartment, and I could not recall the moment I had placed it there. My hands trembled. I told her I was redecorating, that I'd read somewhere that exposed mirrors could create visual clutter. She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way her expression shifted, in the careful distance she began to maintain when we were in the same room. The whispers followed me now. They were no longer confined to the guest bedroom. I heard them in every room of the house, a constant low-frequency hum just beneath the threshold of comprehension. I began to think I recognized words. My name, repeated over and over, woven into the murmur like a thread through fabric. I couldn't be certain. I couldn't be certain of anything anymore. I returned to the basement. I'm not sure why. Some compulsion I couldn't articulate, couldn't resist. The photo album was where I had left it, but it seemed heavier now, more substantial in my hands. I opened it to the portrait of the man in the armchair, and I studied his face until the features began to swim and distort before my eyes. That was when I noticed something I had missed before. In the background of the photograph, partially obscured by shadow, there was a second figure. I had dismissed it initially as a trick of the light, an artifact of the aging photograph. But now, squinting in the dim basement light, I could make out the outline of a person standing in the doorway. The figure was indistinct, barely more than a silhouette. But something about the posture, the proportions, filled me with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. The figure looked like me. I dropped the album. I climbed the stairs. I did not look back. That night, I dreamed I was in the guest bedroom. The man from the photograph sat in the armchair, pipe in hand, watching me with those deep-set eyes. He didn't speak, but somehow I understood what he wanted. He wanted me to sit. He wanted me to stay. He wanted me to understand that this had always been his house, that we were merely temporary guests in a space that belonged to him in ways that transcended legal ownership or physical presence. I woke to find myself standing in the guest bedroom doorway. The armchair was empty, but in the pre-dawn light filtering through the window, I could see the impression of a body still pressed into the cushions, as if someone had just stood up. The air smelled strongly of pipe tobacco. My wife found me there an hour later, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, staring at the empty chair. She asked me what was wrong, and I heard myself laughing, a thin, brittle sound that didn't seem to come from my own throat. I told her nothing was wrong. I told her I had simply been looking at the room, deciding how we might redecorate. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, and I could see that she was frightened. Not of the house, of me. I should leave. I know this. Some part of me still functioning beneath the fog of sleeplessness and paranoia, understands that I need to leave this place, that staying will only lead somewhere I don't want to go. But another part of me, a part that grows stronger each day, each sleepless night, whispers that leaving is impossible, that the house has already become part of me, has seeped into my bones like damp into plaster, that the man in the armchair and I are becoming the same person, slowly, inevitably, in ways that transcend the simple boundary between living and dead. Last night I finally heard the whispers clearly. They weren't coming from the guest bedroom, or from anywhere else in the house. They were coming from inside my own head, in a voice that was and was not my own, speaking words I recognized but couldn't remember learning. I found myself writing his name on a piece of paper this morning, over and over, in handwriting that looks less like mine with each repetition. The letters slant in ways my letters never slanted. The pressure varies in patterns I don't recognize. My wife watched me from across the kitchen table, and I saw her reach for her phone, then hesitate, then set it back down. I want to tell her that I'm fine. I want to tell her that this is temporary, a phase, something that will pass with time and rest, and perhaps a consultation with the right kind of doctor. But when I open my mouth to speak, I hear his voice layered beneath my own, and I know that whatever I say will be a lie. The house settles around me. The walls breathe. The cold spots gather in every corner now, constant and permanent, and I no longer bother to avoid them. In the mirror I uncovered this morning, I don't remember uncovering it, but I must have. It must have been me. I saw two figures standing side by side. One of them was me. The other was him. We were both smiling. His smile and mine were exactly the same. Story 7. The knocking started on the third night after we moved in. At first I dismissed it as the house settling, old bones adjusting to new inhabitants. The real estate agent had mentioned the property was built in 1947, a colonial revival that had passed through several owners before sitting vacant for nearly 2 years. My wife loved the crown molding and the original hardwood floors. I loved the price. Neither of us asked why it had remained empty for so long. The sound came from the wall behind our bed. 3 deliberate taps followed by silence. I lay there in the dark, my wife's breathing slow and even beside me, and waited. Nothing. Just the October wind scraping branches against the window and the distant hum of the refrigerator 2 floors below. I convinced myself I had imagined it, and eventually drifted back to sleep. But it happened again the following night, and the night after that. By the second week, the pattern had become unmistakable. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Always 3 knocks. Never more, never less. Originating from somewhere deep within the plaster and lathe. I started lying awake, waiting for them. My body rigid beneath the sheets while my wife slept peacefully beside me. She never heard them. I asked her once casually over breakfast whether she had noticed any strange noises at night. She looked at me with that particular expression she reserves for moments when she suspects I'm working too hard, and shook her head. The house began to feel different during daylight hours. Smaller somehow, despite its generous square footage. The hallways seemed to contract when I walked through them, the walls leaning imperceptibly inward as if straining to hear my footsteps. I found myself pausing at odd moments, my hand on a doorframe, listening for something I could not name. The air carried a faint smell I could not identify, not unpleasant exactly, but wrong. Like old paper and something sweeter beneath it, almost organic. My wife noticed nothing. She hummed while unpacking boxes in the kitchen, arranged furniture, hung photographs on walls that I had begun to distrust. I started sleeping poorly. The exhaustion crept into my days, making my thoughts sluggish and my temper short. At work, a colleague asked if everything was all right at home. I told him we were still adjusting to the new place. He nodded sympathetically and said nothing more, but I caught him watching me later that afternoon with an expression I could not read. 3 weeks after moving in, I pressed my ear against the bedroom wall while my wife was at work. The plaster was cold, colder than it should have been given the warmth of the room, and I stood there for nearly 20 minutes, my cheek flattened against the smooth surface. breathing shallowly and waiting. I heard nothing, but I felt something, a faint vibration that seemed to travel through my skull and settle somewhere behind my eyes. When I finally pulled away, I noticed a hairline crack in the paint that I was certain had not been there before, running vertically from floor to ceiling like a single dark vein. I called a mason on a Tuesday morning in early November. He arrived the following Saturday, a thick-necked man with calloused hands and a measuring tape clipped to his belt. I explained that I wanted to check the structural integrity of the wall, mentioned something vague about moisture damage and concerns about the foundation. He nodded professionally and began his inspection, knocking on the plaster at regular intervals with his knuckles while I stood in the corner of the bedroom, watching. When he reached the section directly behind where our headboard normally sat, he paused, knocked again, his brow furrowed. He said the wall sounded hollow. Not hollow like empty space between studs, but hollow like there was something substantial behind it. He asked if I had the original blueprints. I did not, but I had obtained a copy of the floor plan from the county records office the week before. A precaution I had told myself was about understanding the home's layout for future renovations. I retrieved it from my study and spread it across the bed. The mason studied it for a long moment, then looked at the wall, then back at the floor plan. He measured the room with his tape, walking from one end to the other, muttering numbers under his breath. When he finished, he stood very still and told me that according to his measurements, there was approximately 8 feet of unaccounted space between this room and the adjacent hallway. 8 feet that did not appear on any official documentation. My mouth went dry. I asked him to open the wall. He hesitated. I could see the reluctance in his shoulders, the way his hands tightened around the measuring tape. But eventually he agreed. He retrieved tools from his truck, a pry bar, a hammer, a flashlight. My wife would be home in 3 hours. I did not call her. The plaster came away in thick chunks, revealing wooden slats darkened with age. The mason worked methodically, creating an opening roughly 3 feet wide. Dust filled the air, carrying that strange sweet smell I had noticed before, stronger now, almost overwhelming. When the hole was large enough, he shined his flashlight into the darkness beyond. I heard him inhale sharply. He stepped back and said I should look for myself. Behind the wall was a room, not a crawl space or an architectural void, but an actual room, perhaps 8 feet deep and 12 feet long, with its own floor, its own walls, its own ceiling. The flashlight beam revealed floral wallpaper, faded to a sickly yellow-brown, peeling at the seams. There was furniture inside, a narrow bed with a rusted iron frame, a wooden chair positioned to face the opening we had just created, a small table holding something I could not identify from where I stood. The air that drifted out was cold and stale, and carried a thickness that seemed to coat the inside of my lungs. I asked the mason how this was possible. He shook his head slowly, and said he had been in this business for 30 years, and had never seen anything like it. A room with no doors, no windows, no apparent means of entry or exit, sealed completely within the walls of the house like a secret kept in bone. He left shortly after, refusing payment. He said he would return Monday to properly reseal the wall, and his voice carried an urgency that needed no explanation. I thanked him and watched him drive away, his truck disappearing around the corner with what felt like unseemly haste. Then I went back upstairs. I do not know how long I stood at the edge of that opening, staring into the hidden room. The afternoon light slanted through the bedroom windows behind me, but none of it seemed to penetrate the space beyond. The darkness inside had a quality I can only describe as dense, as if it were composed of something more substantial than mere absence of light. The wallpaper pattern, roses, I realized, climbing roses, seemed to shift when I was not looking directly at it, the flowers rearranging themselves in my peripheral vision. Eventually, I climbed through. The floor creaked beneath my weight, the wood soft with age or moisture or something else entirely. The smell was almost unbearable now, sweet and cloying, coating my tongue. I approached the small table first. The object resting on its surface was a photograph in a tarnished silver frame, the image so faded that I could barely make out its subject. A figure standing in front of this very house, hand raised as if waving. The proportions seemed wrong somehow. The limbs too long, the head tilted at an angle that suggested the neck was broken or simply built differently than any neck should be. I set the photograph down and turned to examine the rest of the room. The bed was made, the sheets tucked neatly around the thin mattress, though they were gray with dust and age. The pillow held an indentation, as if someone had been lying there recently. The chair faced the opening in the wall, the opening I had just crawled through, positioned precisely, deliberately, like a seat in a theater. How long had it been arranged that way? The room had been sealed for decades at least. No one could have known where the wall would eventually be breached. And yet, I noticed marks on the floor then, faint grooves worn into the wood. They formed a path from the bed to the wall. Our wall, the wall behind which my wife and I slept every night, and back again. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, overlapping and crossing, as if someone had paced this route countless times over an unimaginable span of years. The grooves were deepest directly in front of the section corresponding to our headboard. My hands began to shake. I told myself it was the cold. As I turned to leave, my foot struck something beneath the bed. I crouched down, peering into the darkness under the iron frame, and saw a collection of objects arranged in a neat row. A hairbrush with strands still caught in its bristles, a woman's compact mirror, a fountain pen, a set of reading glasses, and photographs, dozens of them, scattered like fallen leaves, each one showing the interior of a bedroom. Different bedrooms, different decades, judging by the furniture and wallpaper, but all taken from the same angle, the same perspective, as if the photographer had been standing inside a wall, looking out through a gap that should not exist. The most recent photograph showed our bedroom, our bed. The sheets tangled exactly as I had left them that morning. I scrambled backward, my elbow catching the edge of the table, sending the framed photograph crashing to the floor. The glass shattered, and in the sudden silence that followed, I heard something that stopped my heart. 3 knocks, coming from behind me, from inside the walls of the hidden room itself. I do not remember climbing back through the opening. I do not remember calling the mason, or leaving the message on his voicemail, my voice high and strange, demanding he return immediately. I do not remember my wife coming home, or the conversation we must have had, or the dinner she apparently made while I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. What I remember is lying in bed that night, the opening in the wall crudely covered with a tarp and duct tape, listening to my wife breathe beside me while the knocking began again. 3 taps, then silence, then 3 more. Closer now, or louder, or both. I could no longer tell. I remember turning my head slowly toward the covered opening and seeing the tarp move. Just slightly. Just enough to suggest that something on the other side was pressing against it. I remember my wife murmuring in her sleep, a sound of contentment, and I remember wondering if she had always slept so peacefully, or if her dreams had changed since we moved here. I remember wondering why she never heard the knocking, why her clothes smelled faintly of that sweet rotting scent now, why she sometimes paused in doorways and tilted her head at angles that reminded me of something I refused to name. I remember thinking, the photographs were taken from inside the walls. Someone was always watching, and I remember looking at my wife's sleeping face in the thin moonlight and no longer being entirely certain who she was. The mason never returned my calls. His number has been disconnected. I drove past his business address last week and found only an empty lot, overgrown with weeds, as if the building had never existed at all. The opening in the wall has sealed itself. I checked this morning and found only smooth plaster, unmarked, the hairline crack running from floor to ceiling, the only evidence that anything had ever been disturbed. My wife asked why I was pressing my hands against the wall, and I told her I thought I felt a draft. She smiled at me. Her smile has changed. The corners of her mouth lift slightly higher than I remember, and her teeth seem longer in certain light, and sometimes when she looks at me, I see something behind her eyes that I cannot identify. Something patient and old and terribly, terribly interested. The knocking continues every night. But it no longer comes from behind the wall. It comes from inside my wife's chest. 3 deliberate taps originating from somewhere deep within her ribcage while she sleeps beside me. Her breathing slow and even. Her hand resting on my arm with a grip that tightens slightly each time I try to pull away. I have begun to wonder if I ever had a wife at all. I have begun to wonder if the room was always there, waiting, and I simply could not see it until it wanted to be seen. I have begun to wonder what else lives inside the walls of this house. What else has been watching me from spaces that do not exist on any floor plan? What else wears faces I trust? I have begun to wonder if I am still lying in that hidden room, staring up at the faded roses on the ceiling, while something pretending to be me goes about its life in the house beyond the wall, sleeping in my bed, eating at my table, kissing my wife goodnight. The knocking continues. I have stopped counting. Story 8. My reflection in the hallway mirror has always been 1 second delayed. Yesterday, I stopped abruptly to test it. My reflection kept walking, then it turned, looked at me and smiled. I stood frozen for what felt like minutes, but was probably only a few heartbeats. The smile didn't fade. It stretched wider than any expression I've ever made, pulling at the corners in a way that seemed to defy the geometry of my own face. Then, as if nothing had happened, the reflection snapped back into synchronicity, mimicking my stillness, my parted lips, the sweat I could feel beading along my hairline. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a glitch in my perception caused by exhaustion, by the long hours at work, by the insomnia that had been gnawing at me for weeks. The hallway is dim, the mirror is old, its silver backing foxed and uneven in places. These things can create illusions, but I know what I saw. The mirror came with the house. My wife fell in love with it the moment we toured the property 3 years ago. An ornate Victorian piece with a heavy gilt frame, mounted at the end of the narrow corridor that connects our bedroom to the rest of the apartment. She said it made the space feel larger, that the reflection created an illusion of depth. I never liked it. There was something about walking toward my own image in that dim passage that made me uneasy, though I could never articulate why. Now I understand. For the first few days after the incident, I avoided the hallway entirely. I took the long way around, cutting through the kitchen to reach the bedroom, inventing excuses when my wife asked why I kept circling the apartment, like a man lost in his own home. She watched me with that particular expression she gets when she's concerned but trying not to show it. A slight tightening around her eyes, a softness in her voice that feels less like comfort and more like caution. I told her I was fine. I told myself the same thing, but I couldn't stay away forever. The hallway is the spine of our home, and avoiding it meant avoiding her, avoiding our life together, avoiding the very architecture of our existence. So on the 4th day, I forced myself to walk past the mirror. I kept my eyes on the floor. I counted my steps. 7 from the bedroom door to the edge of the frame, 3 more to clear it entirely. I didn't look up. I didn't breathe. And still, I felt it watching me. The sensation of being observed is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. It's not a sound or a sight. It's a pressure, a weight that settles between your shoulder blades and refuses to lift. It's the primal awareness that something is tracking your movements, calculating, waiting. I felt it every time I passed that mirror, even with my eyes averted, even with my pace quickened to nearly a jog. I could sense the reflection's gaze following me like a cold finger tracing the back of my neck. I started sleeping poorly, not the usual insomnia. This was different. I would lie awake in the dark, listening to my wife's steady breathing, and I would think about the smile, that impossible smile, the way it had stretched my features into something that wasn't quite me. What had been looking back at me from that glass? After a week, I decided to test it again. I needed to know if I had imagined the whole thing. My wife was at work, the apartment silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old radiators. I walked to the hallway and stood at its entrance, staring down the corridor at the mirror. My reflection stared back. For a long moment, nothing happened. We stood in perfect synchronicity, 2 versions of the same man separated by the flat plane of silvered glass. I raised my right hand. The reflection raised its left. I tilted my head. It tilted in response. Everything was as it should be. I began to relax. Perhaps I had imagined it after all. The The mind can play tricks when it's tired, when it's stressed, when it's spent too many nights wrestling with anxieties that have no name. Then I blinked. The reflection didn't. It was subtle. So subtle I almost missed it. But I was watching carefully now, cataloging every micro-movement, and I saw it clearly. My eyes closed and opened in a fraction of a second. The reflection's eyes remained fixed, unblinking, pupils dilated just a shade too wide. I stumbled backward. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples, in my fingertips, in the roots of my teeth. The reflection, my reflection, continued to stare at me with those open, unblinking eyes. And then slowly, deliberately, it tilted its head in the opposite direction from mine. I fled. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing on the sidewalk in front of our building, gulping air that tasted of exhaust and autumn leaves. My hands were shaking. A neighbor passed by and asked if I was all right. I must have looked unhinged, pale and wild-eyed, gripping the railing like a man about to collapse. I mumbled something about feeling unwell and retreated inside, taking the stairs to our floor and entering through the kitchen, as far from the hallway as possible. That night, I told my wife I thought we should get rid of the mirror. She looked at me with that expression again, the one that made me feel examined, categorized, filed away under some mental heading I couldn't access. She asked why. I couldn't tell her the truth. How could I explain that my own reflection had become autonomous, had begun to move independently, had begun to watch me with an intelligence that felt ancient and patient and utterly alien? I said it was too dark for the hallway. I said it made the corridor feel cramped. I said I had never liked it, which was the only honest thing I managed to articulate. She said she would think about it. The mirror stayed. In the weeks that followed, the incidents multiplied. Small things at first, discrepancies I could almost rationalize. The reflection's hand lingering a moment too long before matching my gesture. Its posture slightly different from mine, shoulders held at an angle that didn't quite correspond. Its expression neutral when I was smiling, or smiling when I was not. Then the differences became harder to ignore. I would catch the reflection moving in my peripheral vision when I stood still. I would see it turn its head as I walked away, tracking my departure with those dark, liquid eyes. Once I could have sworn I saw it mouth words, lips moving silently behind the glass, forming syllables I couldn't decipher. I began to document the occurrences. I kept a notebook, dates, times, descriptions of each anomaly. I thought that if I could establish a pattern, I might understand what was happening. I might find a rational explanation, some scientific principle of light or perception that could account for what I was witnessing. The notebook filled quickly. 17 incidents in 3 weeks. 17 moments when the reflection behaved as though it possessed its own will, its own agenda, its own terrible awareness. I stopped looking directly at the mirror. I trained myself to pass through the hallway with my gaze fixed firmly on the floor or the wall, never allowing my eyes to drift toward that rectangular portal of glass. But I could still feel it. The weight of observation, the sense of something waiting just beyond the threshold of sight. And there was something else, something that made my blood run cold when I finally allowed myself to acknowledge it. The reflection had started appearing in other mirrors. The bathroom mirror, small and functional, mounted above the sink. The decorative mirror in the living room, a modern piece my wife had chosen to complement our furniture. The black screen of my phone when it sat dormant on the counter. The darkened window of the microwave. Any reflective surface became a potential window into that other place. That space behind the glass where something wearing my face had taken up residence. I saw it everywhere. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. A shape that was almost me, but not quite. Sometimes I would turn quickly, trying to catch it in the act of deviating, but it was always faster, always snapping back into perfect mimicry before I could confirm what I had seen. My wife noticed the change in me. She said I had become distant, distracted. She said I flinched at my own shadow. She asked if something was wrong at work, if I was sleeping enough, if I had considered talking to someone. A professional, she meant. Someone who could explain why her husband had started avoiding mirrors like a man afraid of his own face. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to describe the smile I had seen, the way the reflection had kept walking when I stopped, the mounting evidence that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. But how could I? She would think I was losing my mind. Perhaps I was. Perhaps that was the simplest explanation, that the stress and sleeplessness had finally cracked something in my brain, and I was perceiving distortions that existed only in my fractured cognition. But if that were true, why did the reflection feel more real than I did? Last night, I woke at 3 a.m. to find my wife's side of the bed empty. The sheets were still warm, so she couldn't have been gone long. I assumed she had gotten up for water, or to use the bathroom, or for any of the mundane reasons people rise in the small hours. I lay there in the dark, waiting for her to return. Minutes passed. The apartment was silent. That particular urban silence that isn't really silence at all, but a layered hush of distant traffic and breathing pipes, and the settling of old bones in old walls. I strained to hear her footsteps, the creak of a floorboard, the soft click of a door. Nothing. I got up. The hallway was dark, but there was enough ambient light from the street lamps outside to see the mirror at its end. A rectangle of faint luminescence in the shadows. I hesitated at the threshold, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, my heart already beginning its familiar acceleration. And then I saw her. My wife was standing in front of the mirror, perfectly still. She was facing the glass, her back to me, her posture rigid and strange. She wasn't moving. She wasn't even breathing, as far as I could tell. I called out to her. My voice sounded wrong in the darkness, thin and reedy, swallowed by the silence. She didn't respond. I walked toward her, each step deliberate, my eyes fixed on the back of her head. As I got closer, I could see her reflection in the mirror, her face visible in the glass, pale and expressionless, staring straight ahead. But her reflection's eyes weren't looking at its own face. They were looking at me. I stopped. The reflection of my wife, still motionless, still expressionless, held my gaze with an intensity that felt physical, a pressure against my skull. My own reflection stood beside hers in the glass, and in the dim light I could see that it, too, was watching me. Both of them, staring out from behind the mirror's surface with an attention that was focused and predatory and infinitely patient. Then my wife turned around. She blinked at me, confused, as if emerging from a deep sleep. She asked what I was doing up. She said she couldn't sleep, that she had come to get a glass of water and found herself standing in the hallway without quite remembering how she got there. I looked past her at the mirror. Our reflections stood side by side, perfectly synchronized now, mimicking our postures with flawless accuracy. But in the instant before I turned away, I saw something that made my stomach lurch with a sickening, vertiginous dread. My reflection was still smiling. This morning, I examined my face in the bathroom mirror for a long time. I studied every line, every pore, every subtle asymmetry. I watched my eyes move, my lips part, my nostrils flare with each breath. Everything matched. Everything was as it should be. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a stranger. The reflection blinked when I blinked. It smiled when I smiled. It raised its hand. It turned its head. It followed every command my body issued without hesitation or delay. But there was something wrong with its eyes. A depth that shouldn't be there. A darkness behind the pupils that seemed to recede into an infinite space. A void that existed just beyond the silvered surface. I stared into those eyes, my eyes, and I felt as though I were falling, tumbling into a place where the rules of reflection didn't apply, where the mirrored world had its own geometry, its own physics, its own inhabitants. I don't know what is happening to me. I don't know if the reflection has always been alive, or if something has awakened in it, or if I am simply coming apart at the seams of my own sanity. I have considered all the rational explanations: stress, exhaustion, the onset of some neurological condition, and none of them fit. What I know is this: when I look in the mirror now, I am no longer certain which side of the glass I am standing on. I am no longer certain which one of us is the reflection. And last night, just before I fell asleep, I caught a glimpse of movement from the hallway, a shape passing by the bedroom door, a figure that moved with my gait, my posture, my silhouette, but was walking in the wrong direction, heading deeper into the apartment, instead of toward the bed where I lay paralyzed with terror. I didn't get up to investigate. I couldn't. But this morning, I found something on the bathroom counter that wasn't there before. A small piece of paper folded once. On it, written in my own handwriting, were 3 words. Your turn soon. Story 9. The chair was rocking when I came downstairs this morning. I stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, my hand gripping the banister so hard I could feel the wood grain pressing into my palm. The living room was still dark, the pale gray light of dawn barely filtering through the curtains, but I could see it clearly enough. The silhouette of the rocking chair moving in that slow, deliberate rhythm I had come to dread. Back and forth. Back and forth. The creak of the old wood against the floorboards filled the silence like a heartbeat. But that was impossible. I had sold the chair 3 days ago. I watched it for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than a minute or two. My bare feet were cold against the hardwood floor. My mouth had gone completely dry. The rocking continued, unhurried, patient, as though the chair had all the time in the world, as though it had been waiting for me to wake up and witness this. When my wife came down an hour later, the chair was still. I was sitting on the couch across from it, watching it like a man watching a coiled snake. She asked me why I was staring at my mother's old chair. Your mother's chair, she said. Not the chair. Not that chair. As if it had never left. As if I hadn't spent the better part of a Saturday afternoon loading it into a stranger's truck. I told her I had sold it. I described the buyer, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a slight limp who had seen my listing online. I described the negotiation, the way she had run her fingers along the armrests with something like reverence. I described watching her drive away, the chair visible through the truck's rear window, growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared around the corner. My wife looked at me the way she had been looking at me for months now, that careful, measuring look, the one that made me feel like a specimen under glass. She said I must have dreamed it. She said the chair had been there all along. She said maybe I should call my therapist. The chair sat between us, solid and undeniable, the dark wood gleaming faintly in the morning light. I could smell it. That old, familiar scent of lemon oil and something else. Something I could never quite identify. Something that smelled like my mother's house had smelled, back when she was still alive. Like dried flowers and dust and the faint, sweet edge of decay. My mother passed 8 months ago. The chair arrived 2 weeks after the funeral, shipped from her house along with boxes of photographs and old clothes. We had not been close. Too many years of silence, too many old wounds that never quite healed. When she got sick, I visited her twice in the hospital. I held her hand while she slept and told her things I should have said decades earlier. I don't know if she heard me. The chair was the only piece of furniture I kept. It had always been in her living room, positioned by the window where she could watch the street. When I was very young enough that the memories feel more like dreams, I remember sitting on her lap while she read to me, the steady creak of the rockers, the warmth of her arms around me. I thought keeping the chair might help. I was wrong. The first time I noticed the chair moving on its own was 3 weeks after it arrived. I had come downstairs in the middle of the night for a glass of water. The house was dark and silent, and as I passed through the living room, I saw it. The chair was rocking. Gently, almost imperceptibly, but definitely rocking. I told myself it was a draft, that old houses create their own small movements. But the chair kept rocking. Every night. Always when I was alone. I started staying up later, finding excuses to avoid the living room after dark. I slept poorly, waking at odd hours with the vague sense that something was wrong. Sometimes I would lie in bed and listen, straining to hear past the ordinary night sounds, convinced I could detect the distant creak of the rockers. My wife noticed the change. She suggested I wasn't processing my grief properly. She was probably right. But I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the chair, the cold dread that settled over me every time I looked at it, the way my skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. 3 weeks ago, I decided to get rid of it. I posted the listing online late one night while my wife was asleep. I priced it absurdly low, wanting it gone as quickly as possible. The woman with the graying hair responded within hours. She came the next afternoon, a Saturday, and I helped her load the chair into her truck. I remember the relief I felt as I watched her drive away, the profound, almost giddy sense of release. That night, I slept better than I had in months. But now the chair is back, sitting in the same corner of the living room, angled toward the window, exactly as it was before. I called the woman today. I found her number in my email, in the thread of messages we had exchanged about the sale. The phone rang 5 times before she answered. When I asked about the chair, there was a long pause. She said she had no idea what I was talking about. She said we had never spoken before. She said she didn't own a truck. I checked my email again after I hung up. The messages were gone. Our entire conversation erased as though it had never happened. My sent folder, my inbox, my trash, all empty of any trace of the transaction. The only evidence that remained was the cash I had received, still sitting in my wallet. $300 in worn $20 bills. I showed the money to my wife. I asked her to confirm what she had seen on Saturday. The woman, the truck, me carrying the chair outside. She looked at me with that careful expression again. She said I had spent Saturday in bed with a headache. She said I hadn't left the house all day. I am beginning to think I am losing my mind. The nights have gotten worse. I wake now at exactly 3:17 a.m. Every night, without fail, my eyes snap open and I am instantly awake. The house is never quite silent at that hour. There are sounds, the creak of floorboards in empty rooms, the whisper of something brushing against the walls, and beneath it all, the slow rhythm of the rocking chair. I have stopped going downstairs after dark. The chair seems different now, larger somehow, more present. When I pass through the room during the day, I can feel its weight in my peripheral vision, drawing my attention no matter how hard I try to look away. And there are other things, small things that I hesitate to even acknowledge. The chair has moved, not while I was watching, never while I was watching, but between moments, between glances. Yesterday it was 6 inches closer to the hallway. This morning it was facing a slightly different direction. Its angle shifted just enough to be noticeable. The floor beneath it is scuffed now, faint grooves in the hardwood that trace the path of its wanderings. I mentioned this to my wife. I showed her the marks on the floor. She looked at them for a long moment, her face unreadable, and then she said the marks had always been there. She said I was imagining things. She said maybe I should consider going somewhere, talking to someone, getting help. The way she said, "help," made my stomach clench, as though I were a problem to be solved. Last night I lay awake until nearly dawn, listening. The house was full of sounds I had never noticed before. The tick of cooling pipes, the settling of old wood, the distant hum of appliances running in the dark. And beneath it all, that rhythm, that slow, patient creak. I knew the chair was rocking. I knew it without seeing it. I could feel the motion somehow, a subtle vibration that traveled through the floor and walls and up through the mattress, into my bones. I covered my ears like a frightened child. It didn't help. There is something else I need to write down, though I am not sure I can trust my own perceptions anymore. I saw my mother, not clearly, not the way you see a person standing in front of you. It was more like a suggestion, a half-formed shape at the edge of my vision. I was in the kitchen yesterday afternoon making coffee, and I glanced toward the living room. The chair was there, motionless, positioned in its corner. And in the chair, just for a moment, I saw her. Or I saw something that looked like her. A figure, slumped and still, with gray hair falling across a face I couldn't quite make out. The shape was wrong, the proportions slightly off, as though someone had tried to sculpt a person from memory and gotten the details just slightly incorrect. And then I blinked, and the chair was empty again. I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the tile floor, hot liquid splashing across my feet, but I barely noticed. I stood there staring at the empty chair, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the shape to return. It didn't. The chair remained still, innocent, ordinary. But I know what I saw, or I think I know, or I am no longer certain of anything at all. My wife has started sleeping in the guest room. She says it's because I've been restless, that my tossing keeps her awake. But I see the way she looks at me now, the wariness in her eyes. She keeps her distance during the day, finding excuses to run errands that take hours. When we do speak, our conversations are careful, polite, devoid of substance. I cannot blame her. I know how I must seem. The dark circles under my eyes, the way I flinch at sudden sounds, the hours I spend sitting in the hallway, watching the entrance to the living room, waiting for something I cannot name. She suggested again yesterday that I should go somewhere. A facility, she called it. A place where I can rest, where professionals can help me sort through whatever is happening in my mind. She used gentle words, reasonable words, but I heard the desperation beneath them. She wants me gone. She wants the house to herself. She wants to be free of whatever I have become. I almost agreed. I almost said yes, take me somewhere, just get me away from this chair. But then I thought, what if it follows me? What if, wherever I go, I wake up one morning to find it waiting for me? The same dark wood, the same worn armrests, the same faint scent of lemon oil and decay. What if there is no escape? No distance far enough? No door thick enough to keep it out? The chair is part of me now, or I am part of it. The distinction feels less meaningful with each passing day. It is 3:17 a.m. I am downstairs. I don't remember coming here. One moment I was in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant creak of the rockers. The next I was standing in the living room doorway, my bare feet cold against the floor, my hands trembling at my sides. The chair is rocking. I can see it clearly now, lit by the pale glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains, back and forth, back and forth. That slow and steady rhythm that has haunted my nights for months. The house around me feels wrong. The walls too close, the ceiling too low, the shadows too deep and too eager. The air smells of dust and dried flowers and something else, something sweet and wrong. And in the chair, I see her. Not a suggestion this time, not a half-glimpsed shape at the edge of vision. She is there, solid and present, slumped in the chair with her head lolled to one side. Her gray hair hangs across her face, but I can see the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw. Her hands rest on the armrests, fingers curled, skin pale as candle wax. She is wearing the dress she wore to my wedding, pale blue, with small white flowers. I remember how proud she looked that day, how she cried during the ceremony, how she held my hands afterward and told me she loved me. I hadn't spoken to her in years before that. The wedding was supposed to be a new beginning. It wasn't. The chair continues to rock. My mother doesn't move. I stand in the doorway, unable to advance, unable to retreat, caught between terror and something else, something that feels almost like longing. The distance between us seems both infinite and terrifyingly small. I want to call out to her. I want to ask why she has come back, what she wants from me, whether any of this is real or just the final collapse of a mind that was never as stable as I believed. But my throat is closed, my voice locked away behind a wall of fear. And then she lifts her head. I see her face clearly for the first time. It is my mother's face. Those same eyes I remember from childhood, that same gentle mouth. But it is wrong, distorted, like a reflection in troubled water. She is smiling, a wide, fixed smile that shows too many teeth and doesn't quite reach her eyes. She opens her mouth to speak. My wife found me on the floor this morning, curled up in the corner of the living room, shivering and incoherent. She says I was there for hours. She says my skin was cold to the touch, my eyes open but unseeing. She says I wouldn't respond when she called my name. I don't remember any of it. The last thing I remember is standing in the doorway, watching my mother's mouth open. Whatever she said to me, whatever words passed those pale lips, is lost in a fog of blank static that fills the space where the memory should be. The chair is still there. It has stopped rocking. But now when I look at it, I notice something I never saw before. In the dark wood of the right armrest, there are marks, faint scratches that form recognizable shapes, letters, words. I must have walked past them 1,000 times without seeing them. I approach the chair slowly, my heart hammering, and I lean close to read what is written there. The scratches are old, nearly worn away, but legible if you know where to look. It is my handwriting, and the words say, "I'm so sorry. I should have visited more." I am staring at the message when I hear the sound behind me, not the creak of the rocking chair. Something else, something closer, breathing, slow, steady, patient, right behind me. I haven't turned around yet. I am not sure I ever will. I am sitting here now writing these words, listening to that breath on the back of my neck, wondering which version of reality is true, the one where my mother is gone and I am losing my mind, or the one where she never left at all. Maybe both are true, maybe neither. All I know for certain is that the chair is still here, and I don't think I will ever be able to get rid of it again. And somewhere, in the dark corner of the living room, something is still rocking. Story 10. The faucet drips at exactly 2:14 a.m. I know this because I've been awake for 17 nights now, watching the green glow of the microwave clock shift from 2:13 to 2:14, and then, always then, the first drop falls. It strikes the stainless steel basin with a sound too loud for water, too deliberate for coincidence. I replaced it 3 times. The first plumber said the washer was worn. The second found nothing wrong but changed the entire fixture anyway, pocketing $200 for what he called peace of mind. The third wouldn't come back after the initial visit. He never explained why, just muttered something about the house feeling wrong and left his toolbox behind. It's still sitting in the garage, rusting. My wife sleeps through it all. She has since we moved here 8 months ago, into this Victorian that the realtor called full of character. I've come to understand that character is a word people use when they don't want to say something else. The floors creak in patterns. The walls settle with sighs that sound almost like breathing, and the kitchen faucet drips at 2:14 a.m., regardless of how many times I tear it apart and rebuild it. Last night I decided to catch it in the act. I sat in the kitchen darkness, the only illumination coming from the streetlight filtering through the lace curtains my wife's mother had given us. The room smelled of the lemon cleaner she uses, but underneath it, something else. Something damp and old, like the basement of my grandmother's house, a place I hadn't thought about in decades. The linoleum was cold through my socks. I could feel every ridge and groove where the floor had begun to warp near the sink, though I couldn't remember ever noticing that warping before. At 2:14, the drip began. I watched it fall, a single bead of water that caught the pale light and stretched into a silver thread before striking the basin. Then another, and another. The rhythm was too perfect, too measured. One drop every 3 seconds, like a metronome set by hands that understood time in ways I never could. I must have watched for 20 minutes, maybe 30. Time does strange things in that house after midnight. Eventually, I noticed the water wasn't draining. The basin was shallow, barely an inch deep, but the water should have been sliding down toward the drain. Instead, it pooled. It spread. It moved with purpose toward the edge of the sink and began to drip onto the floor. That's when I saw the words. They formed slowly, letter by letter, in a puddle that had no right to exist. The water arranged itself into shapes that my mind initially refused to interpret as language. But they were letters, they were English, and they said, "I'm in the attic." I don't remember standing up. I don't remember backing away from the sink or colliding with the kitchen island hard enough to leave a bruise on my hip that I would discover the next morning. What I remember is the cold. A deep, impossible cold that seemed to radiate from inside my chest rather than from the air around me. And the absolute certainty that if I looked up, if I let my eyes drift toward the ceiling, I would see something looking back. I didn't look up. I went back to bed and lay beside my wife, listening to her steady breathing, trying to convince myself that exhaustion had finally cracked something fundamental in my brain. People see things when they're sleep-deprived. People interpret random patterns as messages. There's a name for it, pareidolia, or something close. The water hadn't spelled anything. The water was just water, and I was just a man who needed to learn how to sleep again. But I could feel the attic above us. 3 floors up, past the second-story bedrooms we never used, and the narrow staircase we'd blocked with boxes on the day we moved in, because my wife said the space gave her a bad feeling. I'd laughed at her then, I'd laughed at her. Now I lay in the dark, mapping the distance between our bed and that sealed door, and I understood that distance could be measured in more than feet. The next morning, I found myself standing at the bottom of the stairs that led to the second floor. I'd been in the kitchen, making coffee, and then I was here. No memory of walking, no recollection of deciding to move. Just the sudden awareness of my own body in a space I hadn't consciously chosen to occupy. This happened sometimes, I told myself. The mind wanders, the feet follow. It doesn't mean anything. My wife asked me at breakfast if I was feeling all right. She said I looked pale, that there were circles under my eyes she hadn't noticed before. I told her about the faucet, about staying up to watch it, but I didn't mention the message. Some part of me understood that speaking those words aloud, "I'm in the attic," would make them too real, would anchor them to a reality I wasn't ready to accept. She suggested I see someone, a doctor, a therapist, someone who could help with the insomnia. I agreed because agreeing was easier than explaining, and because I had already decided what I was going to do while she was at work. I was going to check the attic. The decision felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, a path that had been laid out before me long before I became aware I was walking it. I waited until her car disappeared down the street, the engine noise fading until it was replaced by the silence of the house, a silence that wasn't really silent at all, but filled with small sounds I'd never noticed before. The tick of the radiator, the groan of old pipes, and beneath it all, so faint I might have imagined it, a rhythmic tapping from somewhere above. The boxes we'd stacked against the attic door were heavier than I remembered. It took me nearly an hour to move them all, and by the time I finished, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the chill that seemed to live permanently in that hallway. The door itself was original to the house, solid oak, painted over so many times that the edges were rounded and smooth, the keyhole filled in with decades of accumulated enamel. No one had opened this door in years, maybe decades, but someone had scratched something into the paint. Fresh scratches, pale against the yellowed surface, forming letters I recognized immediately. Coming. My hand was on the doorknob before I could stop myself. It was cold, not the cold of metal in a drafty hallway, but something deeper, the cold of a winter pond, of earth freshly turned, of spaces that sunlight had never touched. And it was wet. When I pulled my hand away, my palm glistened with moisture that smelled of rust and something else, something organic and wrong. I should have stopped. I should have walked away, called my wife, called the plumber who'd left his toolbox, called anyone who might break the spell of this moment and return me to a world where water was just water, and attics were just spaces where people stored their unwanted things. But I couldn't. The door was already opening, swinging inward on hinges that made no sound, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the light from the hallway behind me. The stairs were narrow. The air was thick with dust and that same damp, ancient smell from the kitchen, stronger now, almost overwhelming. I climbed without thinking, each step a surrender to something I didn't understand, until I emerged into the attic itself. It was empty, completely, impossibly empty. No boxes, no furniture, no evidence that anyone had ever used this space for anything. Just bare wooden floors, exposed rafters, and a single window at the far end, so caked with grime that the sunlight coming through was gray and weak. And in the center of the floor, a puddle. I walked toward it the way one walks in dreams, each footstep both too slow and too fast, the distance stretching and compressing in ways that made my stomach lurch. The puddle was small, maybe 2 feet across, perfectly circular, and it was moving. Not rippling, not flowing. Moving, the surface shifting and roiling as if something beneath it was trying to break through. Words began to form. The same impossible arrangement of water into letters, except these were different. These said, "Look behind you." I didn't want to turn. Every instinct I had, every primitive alarm system hardwired into my brain, screamed at me to keep my eyes fixed forward, to walk to that grimy window and break through it if I had to escape into the daylight and never return. But my body was no longer my own. It had become an instrument of something else's will, and it turned. There was nothing there, just the staircase descending into shadow, just the rafters and the dust and the gray filtered light. But the angle was wrong. The staircase wasn't where it should have been. It had moved, or the room had moved, or I had moved without knowing it. The door I'd entered through was now on my left instead of behind me, and there were markings on the walls I hadn't noticed before. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Scratched into the wood in the same handwriting as the message on the door, covering every available surface in a dense, obsessive scrawl. They all said the same thing. "You're not alone." I ran. Down the stairs that seemed longer than before, through the door that I slammed behind me with every ounce of strength I had, past the boxes I didn't stop to replace, down to the first floor where the sunlight was still real and the air didn't taste like something had lived in it for far too long. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, and I told myself that what I'd seen was a hallucination, a waking nightmare, a break from reality brought on by weeks of sleeplessness and stress. But there was water on the floor, a fresh puddle, still forming, dripping from the faucet I could have sworn I'd turned off completely. And in the water, new words were taking shape. "I'm not up there anymore." My wife came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a floor that was completely dry. I don't know how long I'd been sitting there. Hours, maybe. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the windows, and the kitchen was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She asked me what was wrong. She asked why I'd moved the boxes from in front of the attic door. She asked about the scratches on my arms. Scratches I didn't remember getting, long and thin, running from my wrists to my elbows in parallel lines that looked almost like writing. I told her I was fine. I told her the attic was empty. I told her the faucet had stopped dripping. None of these things were true, or maybe all of them were. I've stopped being able to tell the difference. That night I lay awake again listening. The dripping didn't start at 2:14. It started at midnight, and it didn't stop. A constant rhythmic patter, too loud to be coming from the kitchen, too close to be coming from anywhere except the ceiling directly above our bed. Above our bed, where there was nothing but insulation and wooden beams, and the floor of an attic I would never enter again. Except sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that puddle in the center of the empty room, and I see the words that formed after I ran, the words I didn't stay to read, now somehow inscribed on the inside of my eyelids. "I was always here. You just never looked." I don't know what's in my house. I don't know if it was here when we arrived, or if we somehow summoned it, invited it in through some ritual of domestic normality, making coffee, cleaning floors, sleeping in borrowed beds. I don't know if it's real, or if my mind has finally shattered under the weight of something I was never meant to understand. But I know this. The scratches on my arms are healing into scars that look like letters, and when I run my fingers over them in the dark, I can almost read what they say. The faucet drips. Something in the walls is breathing. And every night the attic door drifts open a little wider, no matter how many times I seal it shut. Story 11. And the wooden horse was in the hallway again. I found it at 6 in the morning, positioned at the exact center of the runner rug, its painted eye. The left one, the only one that remained, staring toward my bedroom door. The thing was old, the kind of old that smells like dust and attics and something faintly sweet, like decay masked by time. I picked it up, and the wood felt wrong against my palm. Warm, as if someone had just been holding it. I have no children. I have never had children. My wife and I discussed it once, years ago, before she left, and the conversation ended the way most of our conversations ended, in silence thick enough to choke on. The house has been mine alone for 3 years now. Mine, and whatever else insists on sharing it with me. The toys started appearing 2 weeks ago. At first I convinced myself I was misremembering. A tin soldier on the kitchen counter. Perhaps I'd bought it at an estate sale and forgotten. A set of wooden blocks stacked beneath the living room window. Maybe they'd been in a box I'd never unpacked. The mind does strange things when you live alone. It fills silences with whispers, empty rooms with shadows, and apparently hallways with toys you've never seen before. But the toys kept coming. Every morning, something new. A porcelain doll with a cracked face appeared on the stairs, her glass eyes clouded like cataracts. A jack-in-the-box materialized on my nightstand, its crank turned halfway frozen mid-song. A collection of marbles arranged in a perfect spiral on the bathroom floor, their colors too vivid, almost phosphorescent in the early light. I started locking the doors, then the windows. I installed a camera in the hallway, a cheap thing from the hardware store, and watched the footage each morning with the desperate hope of a man searching for evidence of his own sanity. The footage showed nothing. Hours of empty hallway, static and silent. And then, between one frame and the next, the toys simply appeared. No movement, no intruder, no explanation. One moment, the hallway was bare. The next, a stuffed rabbit sat against the wall, its button eyes reflecting the infrared light like twin drops of blood. I stopped sleeping through the night. I would lie in bed, listening to the house settle, and I could swear I heard something else beneath those familiar creaks and groans. A rhythm, almost like breathing, almost like footsteps, small and hesitant, circling the perimeter of my room. The Polaroid changed everything. I found it yesterday morning, tucked between the paws of a threadbare teddy bear that had appeared on my reading chair. The photograph was faded, its colors bleeding into sepia at the edges, but the image was clear enough. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, standing in my living room, the same living room where I now sat, frozen, trying to understand what I was seeing. The boy was me. I recognized myself the way you recognize a word written in a language you've forgotten, with a distant, troubling certainty. The shape of my ears, the way I held my shoulders, the birthmark on my left wrist, visible just above the sleeve of a striped shirt I couldn't remember owning. But I had never been in this house as a child. I bought it 6 years ago from an estate agent who'd smelled like cigarettes in desperation. The previous owner had been an elderly woman who'd lived here alone for decades, dying in her sleep in the upstairs bedroom that I now used for storage. Before her, the house had passed through a series of hands I'd never cared to trace. I had no connection to this place, no history here, and yet, there I was, standing in front of my fireplace. My fireplace. The same crack in the mantel, the same brass candlesticks, the same water stain on the ceiling that I'd been meaning to fix for years. The photograph was dated on the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize. August 1987. I would have been 7 in August of 1987. I would have been living 3 states away, in a house that looked nothing like this one, with parents who had never mentioned this place, never showed me a photograph like this, never suggested that any part of my childhood had been erased or rewritten. I called my mother that afternoon. She didn't answer. She rarely answers anymore. Not since my father passed. Not since she moved into the facility with the pastel walls and the nurses who smile too much. I left a message, my voice steadier than I felt, asking about the summer of 1987, asking if we'd ever traveled, if I'd ever been photographed in a house I didn't remember. She hasn't called back. The house feels different now. I've lived here long enough to know its moods. The way the light changes between seasons. The spots where the floor creaks. The particular silence of 3 a.m. when even the refrigerator seems to hold its breath. But something has shifted. The rooms feel smaller somehow, the walls pressing inward like lungs slowly exhaling. The shadows pool in corners they never reached before, and there's a smell now, faint but persistent, threading through the house like a memory. Crayons and old paper and something sweeter underneath. Something that reminds me of warm milk and wool blankets and a fear I can't name. I've started finding things I recognize. Not just toys, although those keep appearing, each morning more than the last, until my house has become a museum of abandoned playthings. But between the unfamiliar objects, I've begun to spot things that trigger something in me, some buried response that feels less like memory and more like instinct. A red yo-yo with a crack along its side, a coloring book filled with pictures I know I never drew, but the hand that held the crayon moved exactly the way my hand moves. A music box that plays a melody I've been humming for days without knowing why. Last night I stayed awake. I sat in the living room with the lights on and the television muted, watching my own house like a stranger. At 3:17 a.m., the smell of crayons grew stronger. The temperature dropped just enough to raise the hair on my arms. And from somewhere above me, from the storage room, from the room where the old woman died, I heard a sound. It wasn't footsteps exactly. It was lighter than that, more deliberate, like small hands pressing against the floor, testing the weight, learning the space. I held my breath and listened, and the sound stopped, as if whatever made it was listening too, as if it was waiting for me to move first. I didn't go upstairs. I'm not proud of that, but I didn't go. I sat in my chair until dawn bled through the curtains, and when I finally worked up the courage to check, the storage room was exactly as I'd left it. Boxes of old clothes, a broken lamp, dust thick enough to write in. No footprints, no disturbance. Just a single marble, bright green, resting on the windowsill where nothing had been before. I've started to notice things about myself that don't make sense. Habits I can't explain. I catch myself reaching for light switches that don't exist, walking toward walls as if expecting doorways. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection seems to hesitate, to lag just a fraction of a second behind my movements. I tell myself it's exhaustion. I tell myself it's the isolation, the weeks without human contact, the echo chamber of my own thoughts. But there's another explanation, one I can't quite face, lurking at the edges of my understanding like something seen in peripheral vision. What if I'm not who I think I am? What if the photograph is true, and everything I remember is the lie? What if I lived here once, as a child, and something happened? Something so terrible that my mind rebuilt itself from scratch, constructed a new past, a new identity, a whole architecture of false memories to protect me from whatever truth waits in these rooms. Or worse, what if there's something in this house that remembers, even when I don't? Something that keeps the toys, something that watches, something that has been waiting, with patient and terrible purpose, for me to come back. I found another photograph this morning. It was under my pillow. Though I know. I checked before I went to sleep. The image shows the same living room, the same fireplace. But this time the boy is older, 12, maybe 13. His face is half hidden, turned toward the camera as if interrupted mid-motion. And behind him, just visible at the edge of the frame, there's a figure. I can't see it clearly. The photograph is too degraded, the figure too close to the border. But something is there, tall, thin, standing in the doorway that leads to the hallway where I find the toys each morning. Standing exactly where I stand when I watch the camera footage. Standing where I was standing last night, waiting for the sound to come again. The figure might be an adult. It might be a shadow, a trick of the light, a processing error in the film. It might be nothing at all. But its posture is wrong. The angle of its head, the length of its arms, the way it seems to lean toward the boy, toward me, with an attention that feels less like watching and more like waiting. I've stopped checking the camera. I've stopped looking at the toys. I've started leaving the lights on in every room. A constellation of yellow bulbs burning against something I can't see but can always feel, pressing against the boundaries of my perception, testing for weaknesses. The house breathes around me, and the smell of crayons and warm milk and old fear fills every room. And somewhere, in a part of my mind I thought I'd locked away forever, something is stirring. Something is remembering. Something is finally, after all these years, waking up. Tonight, I will stay awake again. I will sit in my living room and watch the hallway and wait for the sound of small hands moving in the darkness above me. And maybe this time, I will go upstairs. Maybe this time, I will open the storage room door and face whatever waits behind it. Or maybe I will find that there is nothing there. Nothing but dust and old boxes and the terrible, impossible possibility that the thing making the sounds, the thing arranging the toys, the thing that remembers a childhood I've forgotten, is me. And in the photograph I haven't found yet, the one that waits somewhere in this house like a truth I'm not ready to learn, the figure in the doorway will finally turn around, and I will see its face, and it will be mine. Story 12. The first time it happened, I blamed the system. A malfunction. A sensor glitch. The kind of minor technological hiccup that plagues every homeowner who's ever dared to trust a smart device with anything more complex than turning on a light. My alarm had triggered at 3:07 a.m., the shrill notification piercing through the fog of my deepest sleep cycle. And I'd fumbled for my phone with the clumsy desperation of a man yanked from unconsciousness by invisible hands. Motion detected. Guest bedroom. I'd padded down the hall in my boxers, heart hammering against my ribs with that primal rhythm that speaks to something ancient in us, that lizard-brain certainty that the dark holds teeth. But the room was empty, the bed untouched, the window locked. I'd stood there for several minutes, letting my eyes adjust to the blue-gray wash of moonlight filtering through the curtains, waiting for something to reveal itself. Nothing did. I called the security company the next morning. The technician on the phone, a woman with the practiced patience of someone who fields calls from paranoid suburbanites all day, assured me that false positives weren't uncommon. Temperature fluctuations, dust particles, even shadows shifting as clouds passed over the moon could occasionally trip the infrared sensors. She offered to send someone out, but I declined. These things resolve themselves, I reasoned. But it happened again that night. 3:07 a.m. Exactly. And the night after that, and every night for the next 2 weeks. My wife began sleeping with earplugs, her patience worn thin by my nightly pilgrimages down the hall. She'd roll toward the wall when I slipped back into bed, her silence more eloquent than any argument. We'd been married for 11 years, long enough that I could read entire novels in the tension of her shoulders. This particular story was titled, "I Think You're Losing Your Mind, but I'm Too Tired to Fight About It." Maybe she was right. I started staying up past midnight, sitting in the living room with all the lights on, watching the hallway that led to the guest bedroom like a sentinel guarding against an invasion I couldn't name. The exhaustion accumulated in layers. Gritty eyes, trembling hands, a persistent headache that lived in the space behind my left eyeball. Coffee became less a beverage than a sacrament. I'd pour cup after cup, the bitter warmth the only thing anchoring me to something resembling functionality. The security company sent a technician, a heavy-set man with kind eyes and a tool belt that clinked when he walked. He checked every sensor, every connection, every inch of wiring in the guest room. Everything was functioning perfectly, he told me. The sensors were detecting motion because motion was being detected. He couldn't explain what was causing it, but there was definitely something moving in that room at night. I asked him to be more specific. He shrugged, already gathering his tools. The sensors registered displacement consistent with something roughly human-sized, he said. Walking patterns, back and forth, sometimes circling, like someone pacing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a chair I'd positioned in the hallway, just outside the guest room door, and I watched. The door was open. The room was visible, the made bed with its decorative throw pillows my wife insisted upon, the dresser we'd bought at an estate sale, the reading lamp we never used. All of it still, all of it ordinary. And yet at 3:07, my phone buzzed. Motion detected, and I was staring directly into an empty room. That's when I decided to install the camera. It was a small thing, barely larger than a golf ball, with a wide-angle lens and night vision capability. I mounted it in the corner of the ceiling where it could capture the entire room. My wife watched me work with the expression of someone observing a loved one disappear down a path they cannot follow. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. We both knew I was lying. The first night with the camera, I didn't check the footage until morning. I'm not sure why. Perhaps I was afraid of what I might see. Perhaps I was more afraid of seeing nothing at all, of confirming that the problem wasn't in that room but somewhere inside my own skull. Some synapse misfiring, some chemical imbalance slowly dissolving the membrane between reality and delusion. But I did look, eventually. Sitting at the kitchen table with my third cup of coffee going cold beside me, I pulled up the footage on my laptop and scrubbed to 3:07 a.m. The room was dark but visible in the grainy green of night vision, and it was empty. The bed, the dresser, the lamp, everything in its place. And then the covers moved. I froze, rewound, watched again. The comforter, the one my wife had picked out, cream-colored with a subtle geometric pattern, shifted, rose, and fell, as if something beneath it was breathing, but nothing was beneath it. I'd made that bed myself the day before. I'd smoothed every wrinkle, adjusted every pillow, and there was nothing under those covers when I'd left the room. I was certain of it. I watched the footage 3 more times. Each viewing revealed the same impossible thing. Slow, rhythmic movement, inhalation, exhalation, the gentle rise and fall of respiration, and beneath the covers, a shape, a form that hadn't been there when I'd set up the camera. Something the size and proportion of a human body, curled on its side, facing away from the door, facing the window. I didn't tell my wife. How could I? What words could possibly bridge the gap between her reality and what I'd witnessed on that screen? Instead, I began checking the footage every morning, cataloging each night's evidence like a scientist documenting some new and terrible phenomenon. The shape was always there by 3:07, sometimes earlier. I started reviewing the full night's recordings, trying to pinpoint the moment of arrival. But there was never a moment. The room would be empty at 2:15, empty at 2:45, empty at 3. And then, without transition, without movement caught on camera, the shape would simply be there, as if it had materialized from the darkness itself, as if it had always been there, and the camera was only now revealing what I should have seen all along. I began noticing things during the day, small things, wrong things. The guest room door, which I always left open, would be closed when I passed by. The throw pillows on the bed, which I'd learned to position in a specific way, would be slightly rearranged, not dramatically, just enough to register in the periphery of my attention. Once I found a single long hair on the pillow. Dark, coarse, neither mine nor my wife's. The smell changed too, a faint musk that hadn't been there before. Something organic, something alive. It would hit me whenever I crossed the threshold, a whisper of presence that dissipated almost as soon as I noticed it. I started avoiding the room during daylight hours. I told myself it was because there was nothing to see, but the truth was simpler and more shameful. I was afraid. My wife suggested I see someone, a professional. She used careful language, words like stress and processing and just to talk. But I knew what she meant. She thought I was breaking. Maybe I was. The sleep deprivation alone was enough to explain hallucinations, paranoid ideation, the growing conviction that something was watching me from within the walls of my own home. That's what I told myself. That's what I repeated like a mantra during the long, lightless hours between midnight and dawn. But the camera didn't lie. The camera showed the shape. And night after night, the shape became more defined, clearer. I could make out the curve of a shoulder now, the suggestion of a head. On one recording, I thought I saw the cover shift as if whatever lay beneath was adjusting its position, getting comfortable, settling in. I decided to enter the room at 3:07, to catch it, to confront whatever was hiding under those covers, and either confirm my sanity or shatter it completely. I didn't tell my wife. I waited until she was asleep, then crept down the hall with a flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other, the camera's live feed pulled up on the screen. On my phone, I could see it, the shape, lying there, breathing, but standing in the doorway, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The bed was empty, just sheets and comforter and those goddamn decorative pillows, all arranged exactly as I'd left them. I stood there for 5 minutes, staring at the empty bed while my phone showed me something sleeping in it. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful. I felt it in my chest, in my teeth, a wrongness so profound it seemed to vibrate at a frequency just below conscious perception. I approached the bed. On my phone, the shape stirred. On the bed in front of me, nothing moved. I reached out my hand. My fingers made contact with the comforter. It was warm. I yanked my hand back as if burned. The warmth lingered on my fingertips, body heat, the unmistakable radiation of something alive. But there was nothing there. I could see there was nothing there, and yet my phone showed the shape reacting to my touch, shifting away, drawing the covers tighter around itself. I fled. I've been sleeping in my car for the past week. My wife thinks I've lost my mind entirely. Perhaps I have. I still check the footage every morning. The shape is always there. And lately, it's been changing, becoming more distinct, more recognizable. Last night, as I reviewed the recording in the gray pre-dawn light, I noticed something new. The shape had rolled over. It was facing the camera now. Facing me. And while the night vision grain made certainty impossible, I could have sworn I recognized the slope of its shoulder, the specific way it tucked its arm beneath the pillow, the familiar proportions of a body I knew as intimately as my own. Because that's how I sleep, exactly that way, every night for my entire adult life. I've been staring at my phone for hours now. The live feed is still running. The shape is still there, breathing under the covers in my guest room. And I'm here, in my car, in a parking lot 3 miles from my house. 2 places at once. Or maybe not in either of them. Not really. Not anymore. My wife called this morning. She sounded strange, distant. She said I'd seemed off lately. Not myself. She said I'd been talking in my sleep, saying things that frightened her, things about watching, about waiting, about how much longer until I could finally rest. I don't remember saying those things, but I remember the warmth of those covers, and somewhere deep in the architecture of my mind, beneath the exhaustion and the terror and the creeping certainty that I'm coming apart at the seams, a small and terrible voice whispers that maybe I wasn't reaching towards something in that bed. Maybe I was reaching for myself, and maybe whatever's been watching the footage every morning, cataloging the evidence, sleeping in a car 3 miles from a house it no longer recognizes. Maybe that's not me at all. The shape on the screen just moved again. It's sitting up now, covers pooled around its waist. It's looking directly at the camera, and even through the pixelated blur of night vision, I can see it smiling. I'm afraid to look away, and I'm more afraid to discover why. Story 13. The refrigerator door was open again. I stood in the pale glow of the kitchen at 3:47 a.m., my bare feet absorbing the cold from the tiles, and stared at that white rectangular mouth gaping in the darkness. The compressor hummed its low, mechanical song, a sound I had grown to despise over the past 3 weeks. The light inside cast long shadows across the linoleum, illuminating the milk carton, the leftover containers, the vegetables slowly wilting in their drawer. Everything in its place. Everything untouched. And yet the door hung open, as if expecting someone. My wife had stopped believing me. She would find me in the mornings, dark circles carved beneath my eyes, and she would touch my shoulder with that particular gentleness reserved for the unwell. She suggested stress. She mentioned the name of a therapist her colleague had recommended. She did not say the word she was thinking, but I could read it in the careful way she avoided my gaze. I could taste it in the silence between her sentences. I closed the door. The seal made its familiar sucking sound. I pressed my palm flat against the white surface and felt the vibration of the machine working beneath, felt the cold seeping through the metal and into my skin. I held it there until my hand ached. The first time it happened, I blamed the seal. The second time, I blamed myself. Perhaps I hadn't closed it properly. Perhaps I was more exhausted than I realized. By the fifth time, I called a technician. He was a heavy man with grease-stained fingers and a perpetual squint, and he spent 40 minutes examining every component, every hinge, every mechanism. He found nothing. The seal was perfect. The hinges were aligned. The magnetic strip was intact. He shrugged and told me that sometimes old appliances developed quirks. He told me to call again if the problem persisted. He did not look me in the eyes when he said it. The problem persisted. I began setting up small tests. A strand of my wife's hair stretched across the gap between door and frame. A precise arrangement of items on the shelves, photographed with my phone before bed. A thin layer of flour dusted on the floor in front of the refrigerator, smooth as fresh snow. Every morning the hair was broken. The items were rearranged, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but rearranged nonetheless. The flour showed no footprints, no marks of any kind. Just a smooth, undisturbed surface leading up to an open door. I stopped sleeping. Not consciously. My body simply refused to surrender to unconsciousness, while that machine hummed its endless song in the kitchen below. I would lie in bed beside my wife, listening to her breathing deepen into the rhythm of sleep, and I would count the seconds between each mechanical click and whir. Sometimes in the deepest hours of the night, I thought I heard something else. A wet sound, organic, like meat shifting against meat. 2 weeks into my vigil, I bought the padlock. It was a heavy thing, brass and steel, the kind used to secure storage units and warehouse doors. The key was thick and satisfying in my palm, and when I threaded the lock through the handles, the refrigerator door handle and a heavy-duty hook I had screwed into the adjacent cabinet, I felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I breathed without that tight pressure behind my ribs. My wife watched me from the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She asked if I was all right. I told her I would be. She did not ask about the padlock. Perhaps she was afraid of the answer. That night, I slept. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in what felt like months. I sank into the mattress and let the darkness take me. And when I woke, it was to pale morning light filtering through the curtains and the distant sound of birds. I felt rested. I felt renewed. And then I went downstairs. The padlock was open. It hung from the hook, brass tongue extended. The mechanism sprung as if someone had simply inserted the key and turned. But the key was in my hand. I had slept with it clutched in my fist, the metal edges leaving red indentations in my palm. I uncurled my fingers and stared at it. Still there, still solid, still the only key that could open that particular lock. The refrigerator door was ajar. Just a crack. Just enough for that thin line of light to escape into the kitchen. I approached slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs with such force that I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The tiles were cold beneath my feet. The air smelled wrong, not rotten exactly, but organic. Mushrooms and damp earth and something underneath, something older, something I could not identify. I pulled the door open. Everything was in its place. The milk carton, the leftovers, the wilting vegetables. But the arrangement was wrong. The items had been moved, shifted, reorganized in ways that followed no logic I could understand. The milk was on the bottom shelf, where the vegetables should have been. The leftovers were stacked in a precise pyramid that I certainly had not created. And at the back of the refrigerator, in the darkest corner of the lowest shelf, there was a space. A hollow. An absence where something should have been. I could not remember what had occupied that space. I stared at it for a long time, trying to conjure the image of whatever belonged there, but my mind returned only static. The empty space seemed to pulse with significance, with meaning, with something that lurked just beyond the threshold of comprehension. I told my wife about the padlock. She listened without interruption, her coffee cooling in her hands, and when I finished, she was quiet for a very long time. She suggested I see someone, a professional. She said the word this time. She said several words, in fact, words that hung in the air between us like accusation. I heard the fear in her voice, but it was not fear of what might be in the refrigerator. It was fear of me, of what I was becoming. That night, I installed a camera. I positioned it on the counter, angled to capture the entire refrigerator and several feet of floor on either side. I checked the battery, verified the memory card, tested the night vision. I double-locked the padlock and kept both keys, the original and the spare I had made that afternoon, in separate pockets of my pajama pants. I did not sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes open, counting the minutes until dawn. In the morning, the padlock was open. Again, the keys were still in my pockets, both of them. I checked the camera with trembling hands, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The footage showed nothing. For 6 hours, the kitchen remained static. The refrigerator hummed. The shadows did not move. And then, at 3:23 a.m., the screen dissolved into static. White noise, visual chaos. For exactly 17 seconds, the recording captured nothing but electronic snow. When the image returned, the padlock was open and the refrigerator door was ajar. I watched those 17 seconds over and over. I slowed the footage, enhanced it, analyzed it frame by frame. In the final moment before the static began, I thought I saw something. A flicker. A shape. A darkness that seemed to lean out of the refrigerator's interior, stretching toward the camera with something that might have been curiosity. I deleted the footage. I do not know why. My hands moved of their own accord, my finger pressing the button before my mind could register the action. When it was done, when the recording was erased beyond recovery, I felt a profound sense of relief that I could not explain and did not want to examine. My wife left for her sister's house the following day. She said she needed space. She said I was scaring her. She said a lot of things, her voice thick with tears she refused to shed in front of me, and I nodded and agreed, and promised to seek help. I watched her car disappear down the street, and I felt nothing. Not loneliness, not sadness, just a hollow, empty space in my chest that seemed to echo the hollow, empty space at the back of the refrigerator. I began to conduct experiments. I left offerings, scraps of meat, raw and red and glistening, cups of milk, positioned precisely in the center of the middle shelf. I photographed them before bed, and photographed them again in the morning. The meat was always gone, the milk was always drained. But more disturbing were the things that appeared in their place. Strange arrangements of items from elsewhere in the house. A button from my winter coat. A strand of my wife's hair, coiled into a perfect spiral. A photograph from our wedding, the faces scratched away with something sharp. I stopped leaving my bedroom at night. I installed a lock on the inside of the door, a simple deadbolt, nothing elaborate, and I wedged a chair beneath the handle for good measure. I kept the lights on. I kept the television playing, its sound a constant babble of human voices that drowned out the more subtle noises of the house. But I could still hear the refrigerator. Its hum penetrated the walls, vibrated through the floor, resonated in my skull like a second heartbeat. And at night, in the darkest hours, I heard other sounds. The soft click of the padlock opening, the whisper of the door swinging wide, the wet, organic shifting of something moving inside that cold, white space. I stopped eating food from the refrigerator. I stopped eating altogether, subsisting on crackers and bottled water that I kept locked in my bedroom closet. I grew thin. My clothes hung from my frame like curtains. When I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I did not recognize the hollow-eyed creature staring back at me. My colleague came to check on me. He stood on the front porch, concern etched into his features, and asked why I had missed so many days of work. I told him I was fine. I told him I was dealing with a personal matter. I did not invite him inside. When he left, I watched him through the window until his car was out of sight, and then I went to the kitchen. The refrigerator door was open. But this time, something was different. The empty space at the back of the bottom shelf, that hollow, that absence that had haunted me for weeks, was filled. There was something there, something small and dark and glistening, curled into the corner like a sleeping animal. I leaned closer, my breath fogging in the cold air that spilled from the open door, and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a key, not my key. Not the brass key that opened the padlock, which was still in my pocket, still solid, still real. This was something else, something older. It was black with tarnish and spotted with rust, and its shape was wrong. The teeth too long, the head carved with symbols I did not recognize, could not recognize, refused to recognize. I reached for it. My hand moved without my permission, my fingers extending toward that dark, gleaming shape. The air around it was colder than the rest of the refrigerator, cold enough to burn, cold enough to ache. And as my fingertips brushed the metal, I felt something. A presence. Not in the refrigerator, not in the kitchen, behind me. I did not turn around. I could not turn around. My body had become a statue, frozen in place, my hand extended, my breath stopped in my throat. But I could feel it there, in the space between my shoulder blades, in the prickling of the hair on the back of my neck. Something was watching me. Something was waiting. Something had been waiting for a very long time. The refrigerator door began to close. It moved slowly, silently, swinging on hinges that should have creaked but made no sound at all. I watched it close around my extended arm, felt the seal press against my wrist, and still I could not move. Still, I could not turn. Still, I could not breathe. The door stopped, just short of closing completely. Just enough of a gap for me to pull my hand free, but I didn't. I couldn't. Because in that final moment, in the narrowing sliver of light that spilled from the refrigerator's interior, I saw something that shattered every fragile belief I had built to protect my sanity. The black key was gone. In its place was my own hand, reaching back toward me from the darkness of the shelf, fingers curled around nothing, palm facing upward in a gesture of invitation. The same calluses, the same old scar across the knuckle, the same wedding ring, catching the light with the same dull gleam. The hand began to wave. I am writing this at my kitchen table. The refrigerator hums behind me, its door firmly closed, the padlock hanging open on its hook. The black key is in my pocket now. When it arrived there, I cannot say. When I decided to keep it, I do not recall. My wife has not returned my calls. My colleague has not come back. The house is quiet, save for the endless mechanical heartbeat of the machine that has consumed my life. I do not know what opened the padlock from inside. I do not know what waits in the cold and the dark, patient and silent and hungry. But I know that there is a door in my kitchen that no longer leads only to milk and leftovers and wilting vegetables. I know that the key in my pocket grows colder with each passing hour. And I know that tonight, when the clock strikes that sacred hour between 3 and 4 a.m., I will use it. The refrigerator hums. Somewhere, in the hollow spaces of my mind, something hums back. I have stopped wondering whether I am losing my sanity. I have begun to wonder instead whether sanity was ever mine to lose, or whether something else has been wearing it all along, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to understand. The padlock hangs open. The door is just barely ajar, and for the first time in weeks, I am not afraid. That, more than anything else, is what terrifies me most. Story 14. Every Sunday morning at exactly 7:15, I hear my mother calling me for coffee. The first time it happened, 3 weeks after the funeral, I convinced myself it was a dream bleeding into wakefulness. The second time, I blamed grief, that peculiar cruelty of loss where the mind manufactures what the heart refuses to release. By the 6th month, I had stopped trying to explain it. I simply lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her voice drift up from the kitchen below like smoke rising through floorboards, and waited for the silence to return. She always called the same way. 2 syllables stretched with that particular cadence she'd perfected over 40 years of Sunday mornings. "The coffee's ready. Come down before it gets cold." I never responded. I learned early that if I held my breath, if I pressed my palms flat against the mattress and counted backward from 100, the voice would fade. It would dissolve into the ambient hum of the old house settling, and I could resume my careful pretense of normalcy. But yesterday, something changed. I had been awake for hours, unable to sleep through the thick August heat that pressed against the windows like a living thing. The air conditioning had failed sometime around 3 in the morning, and I'd spent the remaining hours tangled in damp sheets, drifting through that liminal space between consciousness and dream. When the call came, earlier than usual, the sky still purple with pre-dawn light, I was not prepared. The word left my mouth before I could stop it. A single syllable, hoarse from disuse. "Coming." The silence that followed was absolute. Not the ordinary quiet of an empty house, but something deeper, something that seemed to absorb sound itself, swallowing the distant traffic noise and the persistent drip of the bathroom faucet, and even the rhythm of my own breathing. I lay frozen, suddenly aware of how cold the room had become despite the broken air conditioning, feeling goosebumps rise along my arms in waves. Then the whisper came. It rose from somewhere below me, threading through the gaps between floorboards, intimate and terrible. "Finally, you answered." I did not go downstairs that morning. I stayed in bed until noon, until the heat became unbearable, until my bladder forced me to move. When I finally descended the stairs, each step deliberate, my hand white-knuckled on the banister, the kitchen was empty. The coffee maker sat cold and dark on the counter. A thin layer of dust had gathered on its surface, undisturbed. That was yesterday. Today is Sunday again, and I have been awake since midnight, sitting in the living room with every light blazing, waiting. The house has begun to feel different since that morning. I notice things now that I cannot explain. Small wrongnesses that accumulate at the edges of my perception like sediment in still water. The family photographs on the mantel have shifted slightly, faces angled toward the kitchen doorway as if watching for something. The grandfather clock in the hallway, which stopped working years before my mother's illness, has started ticking again. Its rhythm is irregular, syncopated, nothing like the steady heartbeat it once produced. Sometimes it sounds almost like breathing. My wife noticed something was wrong 3 days ago. She found me standing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, staring at the coffee maker, and asked what I was doing. I told her I couldn't sleep. She accepted this with the weary patience she has developed over 2 years of my grief, touching my shoulder briefly before returning to bed. I did not tell her about the voice. I did not tell her that I had been standing there for almost an hour, waiting for it to call again. I have started avoiding certain parts of the house. The basement stairs creak differently now, a sound like whispered conversation just below the threshold of understanding. The spare bedroom where my mother spent her final months carries a smell I cannot identify. Not decay, nothing so obvious. Something sweeter, like the perfume she used to wear, but wrong somehow. Curdled. I keep that door closed, but twice this week I have found it standing open, morning light spilling across the threshold like an invitation. My wife asked me yesterday why I had moved all the coffee cups to the highest shelf. I did not remember doing this, but when I checked, there they were. Every mug in the house arranged in a neat row, handles facing the same direction, far above comfortable reach. My mother was short. She always complained about having to use a step stool in this kitchen. I told my wife I must have done it while half asleep. She looked at me with an expression I am learning to recognize. Concern shading towards something else. Something colder. The dreams started 4 nights ago. In them, I am always in the kitchen. The light is gray, the color of early morning, and I am sitting at the table with a cup of coffee growing cold between my hands. My mother sits across from me, but I cannot see her face. It is not that she has no face. I understand somehow that it is simply turned away from me, always turned away, no matter how I shift in my chair or strain to look. She talks to me in these dreams. Her voice is exactly as I remember it, warm and slightly hoarse from decades of cigarettes she quit too late. She tells me about the garden, about the neighbors, about recipes she wants to try, normal things, comforting things. But underneath her words, I hear another voice, hers as well, but different, whispering. The whisper says things I cannot quite make out, syllables that slip away like water through fingers, leaving only a residue of dread. I wake from these dreams with the taste of coffee on my tongue, though I have not drunk coffee in 2 years. The taste lingers for hours. Last night, the dream changed. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, so cold they burned, and when she finally turned to face me, I woke screaming. My wife was already sitting up asking what was wrong, but I could not answer. I could not explain what I had seen because the moment I opened my eyes, the image vanished, leaving only a profound sense of wrongness. A certainty that whatever had looked at me from my mother's chair was not, had never been, was wearing something that had once been. I could not finish the thought then. I cannot finish it now. The voice came again this morning. I was alone in the house. My wife had left early for work, pressing her lips to my forehead with that same expression of careful concern, telling me to rest, to take care of myself, to maybe call someone. A professional. She has been saying this more often lately. The call came at 7:15 exactly. The same 2 syllables, the same cadence. But there was something beneath it this time, an undercurrent of eagerness that made my stomach clench. I did not respond. I sat on the couch with my hands pressed over my ears, counting backward from 100, waiting for it to stop. But it did not stop. It called again, and again. Each repetition slightly louder, slightly closer, until I could feel the words vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. Then it said something new. I know you can hear me. The whisper slid through my pressed palms, bypassed my covered ears, settled directly into the center of my skull. You answered once. You can answer again. Please, I've been waiting so long I ran, and so I grabbed my keys and fled the house and drove for an hour with no destination, hands shaking on the wheel, radio turned up loud enough to drown out everything but its senseless noise. When I finally stopped, pulled over on a rural road I did not recognize, I sat in the car and tried to convince myself that I was losing my mind. This would be preferable. This would be explicable. Grief does strange things to people. I have read about auditory hallucinations, about the tricks a traumatized brain can play. There are medications. There is therapy. There is the slow, painful work of healing. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the back seat was not empty. There was nothing there. I need to be clear about this. There was no figure, no shape, no visible presence. But there was something wrong with the air itself. A density, a pressure, a sense of watching that prickled across my skin like static electricity. And in the silence of the car, with the engine still running, and the radio suddenly reduced to white noise, I heard breathing that was not my own. I drove home. I do not know why. Perhaps because there was nowhere else to go. Perhaps because some part of me understood that distance would not help. That whatever was calling me had been calling for 2 years, and answering once had opened a door I did not know how to close. The house is quiet now. I have been sitting in the living room for 6 hours, watching shadows lengthen across the floor as evening approaches. The coffee maker turned itself on an hour ago. I heard it gurgling from the kitchen, the familiar sound of water heating, and I have not moved. I will not move, but I can smell it. That rich, bitter aroma drifting through the house. My mother always made it too strong. This smells exactly right. My wife called to say she would be late. Her voice sounded strange on the phone, distant, distorted, as if filtered through water. I told her I loved her, and she paused for a long moment before responding. When she finally spoke, her words were not quite in sync with her voice. and I realized I could not be certain I was speaking to her at all. I hung up and turned off my phone. The coffee smell is stronger now. It fills every room. It coats the inside of my throat. The grandfather clock has stopped its irregular ticking and begun to chime. Not the hour, but something else. A pattern I almost recognize. There are footsteps in the kitchen. I can hear them clearly, soft, shuffling. The sound my mother made in her final weeks, when walking had become difficult, when she had to steady herself against counters and walls. They move from the coffee maker to the table. I hear the scrape of a chair being pulled out, the gentle clink of ceramic against wood. She is waiting for me. She has been waiting for 2 years, and yesterday I finally answered, and now she will wait forever if she has to, because that is what mothers do. The footsteps have stopped. The house holds its breath. In the kitchen, a chair scrapes against the floor again. The second chair this time. My chair. The one where I sat every Sunday morning for 40 years, drinking coffee and pretending to listen while my mother talked about things that seemed so unimportant then and now feel like treasures I have carelessly lost. The lights in the living room flicker once, twice. The smell of coffee intensifies until it is almost unbearable, until I can taste it on my tongue, until I am drowning in it. And then her voice comes one final time. Not a call this time, not a whisper. Something in between. Something that sounds exactly like love, and nothing like love at all. The coffee's getting cold. I stand. My legs move without my permission, carrying me toward the kitchen doorway. The light inside is gray, the color of early morning, though it is nearly midnight. I can see the table. I can see 2 cups of coffee steaming gently in the impossible light. I can see the empty chair across from mine. I can see it is not empty at all. And as I step across the threshold, as the cold washes over me like water, as the smell of coffee and perfume and something sweet and wrong fills my lungs, I realize I am not certain I ever left the bed yesterday morning. I am not certain I answered with my voice. I am not certain I am the one walking toward that table. But I sit down anyway. The coffee is perfect, just how she used to make it. Across from me, something that sounds exactly like my mother begins to speak. I listen. I have been listening for 2 years. I will listen forever now. And somewhere far away, in a room I can no longer quite remember, a phone is ringing and ringing and ringing, and a woman I think I used to love is asking why I will not answer. But I have already answered. Finally, I answered. Story 15. The first time I heard it, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just the house settling, the way old houses do when the temperature drops and the wood contracts. A creak here, a groan there. Normal sounds, expected sounds. That's what I told myself as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the pale moonlight trace unfamiliar patterns across the plaster. But the clock on my nightstand read exactly 12 a.m. I remember that detail because I've become obsessed with details now. The time, the duration, the exact quality of the sound, whether it's a scrape or a shuffle, a drag or a tap. I keep a notebook by my bed. My wife thinks I've lost my mind. Some nights, watching her sleep undisturbed while I lie rigid beside her, I wonder if she might be right. It started 3 weeks ago, though it feels like months. Time has become elastic, stretching through sleepless nights and snapping back during foggy, disoriented days. The sounds began small, a soft thumping directly above our bedroom, rhythmic and deliberate, lasting precisely 4 minutes before stopping. I timed it. I time everything now. Our house has no attic. I verified this the morning after the first occurrence. I walked outside in my bathrobe, coffee growing cold in my hands, and studied the roofline. The structure is simple, a single-story ranch built in the 1970s, flat ceiling, standard insulation, then roof. No crawl space, no access point, no room for anything or anyone to move around up there. The blueprints I requested from the county records office confirmed what I already knew. There is nothing above my bedroom ceiling except 12 inches of fiberglass insulation and wooden trusses. And yet, every night at midnight something moves up there. The sounds have evolved. That's the word I use in my notebook, underlined twice. Evolved. The initial thumping gave way to scratching during the second week, a persistent rasp like fingernails dragging across the inside of the drywall. Then came the shuffling, slow, measured movements that seemed to travel the length of the ceiling, from the corner above my closet to the window facing the street, back and forth, for exactly 4 minutes. Always 4 minutes. Always starting at midnight. Never a second early, never a second late. My wife sleeps through it. Every single night she sleeps through it. Her breathing remains deep and steady while I lie paralyzed beside her, every muscle in my body clenched, listening to something impossible move through an impossible space. When I shake her awake, desperate for validation, desperate for someone else to hear it, the sound stopped the moment her eyes flutter open. She asked me, gently at first and then with growing concern, if I'd been sleeping well. If work had been stressful, if maybe I should talk to someone. I heard what she didn't say, that she thinks I'm imagining things, that the sounds exist only in my deteriorating mind. But I've recorded them, or I've tried to. That's where things become difficult to explain, even to myself. I set up my phone to record audio overnight, placing it on the nightstand with the microphone pointed toward the ceiling. The first night, the recording captured nothing but ambient silence and my own restless breathing. The second night, static overwhelmed the audio at exactly 11:59 p.m., clearing at 12:04 a.m., leaving a 4-minute gap of white noise. The third night, the phone's battery drained completely between 11:45 and midnight, despite being fully charged. On the fourth night, I borrowed a digital recorder from a colleague at work, an old-fashioned device, no smart features, just a simple machine that captures sound. When I played it back the next morning, headphones pressed tight against my ears, I heard something that made my blood crystallize. Breathing. Not my breathing. Not my wife's breathing. Something else. Something wet and labored, with a rattling quality that suggested damaged lungs or fluid-filled airways. It was faint, barely audible beneath the ambient hiss of the recording, but unmistakably present. And beneath the breathing, so quiet I had to replay it a dozen times to be sure, I heard what sounded like whispered words. I couldn't make out what they said. I'm not sure I want to. The insomnia settled in after that. Sleep became something I feared rather than craved. I started drinking coffee after dinner, then after 9, then continuously through the night. Anything to keep myself alert and aware. I needed to hear it. I needed to understand. My reflection in the bathroom mirror grew haggard, the skin beneath my eyes darkening to a bruised purple, my cheeks hollowing out as my appetite vanished alongside my rest. I began noticing things during the day. Small things. Wrong things. The ceiling in the bedroom had developed a faint discoloration, a yellowish stain spreading slowly outward from a point directly above my pillow. When I pressed my palm against it, the plaster felt warm. Not dramatically so, not hot enough to suggest a fire or electrical fault, but noticeably warmer than the surrounding surface, like something alive was pressing against it from the other side. My wife couldn't feel it. She placed her hand exactly where mine had been and looked at me with eyes full of worried pity. I stopped telling her about the sounds after that. The isolation is the worst part, I think. Worse than the fear, worse than the exhaustion, carrying this alone, knowing something is happening and having no one who believes me, no one who can hear what I hear. It's a particular kind of torture. I catch myself studying my wife sometimes, watching her move through our home with casual ease, and I feel a gulf widening between us. She inhabits a world where ceilings are just ceilings, where midnight is just a time, where the sounds I hear are symptoms of stress or mental breakdown. I used to live in that world too. I miss it. Last Tuesday, I did something I'm not proud of. I waited until my wife left for work. Then I went to the garage and retrieved the ladder. I carried it into the bedroom, set it up directly beneath the stain, and climbed until my face was inches from the ceiling. The warmth was more pronounced up close. I could smell something too, a faint organic odor, like sweat or breath, mingled with something older and earthier. Mold, I told myself. Water damage. There had to be a rational explanation. I pressed my ear against the plaster, and something pressed back. Not hard, not violently. Just a gentle pressure, a subtle yielding of the surface, as if something soft on the other side was mirroring my position, listening to me the way I was listening to it. I scrambled down the ladder so fast I nearly fell, my heart slamming against my ribs, my legs shaking too badly to support my weight. The stain on the ceiling looked larger, darker, shaped, I realized, with creeping horror, almost like a face. I called in sick to work the next 3 days. I told them I had the flu. In reality, I sat in the living room with every light in the house blazing, watching the doorway to the bedroom as if something might emerge at any moment. My wife came home each evening to find me unwashed and unshaven, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled notebook pages filled with obsessive documentation. She tried to talk to me. She begged me to see a doctor. When I refused, she slept in the guest room. I heard her crying through the wall. I wanted to go to her, to explain, to make her understand. But how do you explain something you don't understand yourself? The sounds have changed again. Last night, or was it the night before? The days blur together now. The scratching stopped, the shuffling stopped. For a long, terrible moment at exactly midnight, there was perfect silence. Then, from directly above my head, I heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. And I swear, I heard my own voice answer from somewhere inside the ceiling, muffled and distant, like a recording played through a wall. It said my name, my full name. Then it laughed, a low, breathy sound that went on for exactly 4 minutes before cutting off with the precision of a switched-off radio. I have not slept since. My wife moved out yesterday. She packed a bag while I sat on the living room couch, knees drawn to my chest, watching her with eyes that felt too dry and too wide. She told me she loved me. She told me I needed help. She told me she couldn't watch me do this to myself anymore. When she asked if I was going to say anything, I opened my mouth to respond, but the only thing that came out was a number. 4 minutes, I whispered. It's always 4 minutes. She left without looking back. I'm sitting in the bedroom now. It's 11:47 p.m. The house is silent except for the ticking of the clock and the sound of my pen scratching across paper. The stain on the ceiling has grown again. It stretches nearly from wall to wall, a vast yellow-brown continent mapped in water damage and impossible biology. Sometimes when I stare at it too long, I see it pulse, like a heartbeat, like breathing. The warmth radiating from it is constant now, a feverish heat that makes the room feel tropical and close. I've moved the ladder back into the room. It stands directly beneath the center of the stain, waiting for me. Because I've realized something tonight, something I should have understood weeks ago. The sounds aren't trying to frighten me. They're not warnings or threats. They're invitations. Something up there wants me to find it, wants me to see it, wants me to join it. And the truly terrifying part, the thing that makes me question everything I thought I knew about myself. I want to climb that ladder. The clock reads 11:56 p.m. My notebook is nearly full. Outside, a dog barks once, twice, then falls silent. The neighborhood sleeps. My wife is gone, probably at her sister's house, probably already making phone calls to psychiatrists and divorce lawyers. None of that seems to matter anymore. I'm going to climb the ladder. I'm going to press my face against that warm, yielding ceiling, and I'm going to listen. Maybe I'll finally understand what's been waiting for me all this time. Maybe I'll discover there was never anything there at all, that the stain is just a stain and the sounds were always inside my own crumbling mind. Maybe I'll realize that the voice I heard, my voice, was just an echo of my own fracturing consciousness, crying out for attention from the darkness behind my eyes. Or maybe I'll find something else. The clock ticks over to 11:59. I grip the first rung. Above me, in a space that cannot exist, something begins to stir. And for the first time in weeks, I'm not afraid. I'm not anxious. I'm not exhausted or paranoid or desperate for answers. I feel instead a profound and terrifying sense of peace, of homecoming, of recognition. The ceiling is warm against my palm as I reach up, up toward that spreading stain, toward those sounds that have become more familiar to me than my own heartbeat. Midnight arrives, and something above me whispers, in my own voice, "Welcome home."